All right, hello and welcome back, everybody, to the Game Dev Show. I'm here with Yorai, Jason Story, and Andrew today. We're going to be talking about Unity development, some really interesting shader stuff, lottery tickets, meetups, and quite a bit more. There's a lot to talk about today, so if you're interested in Game Dev, make sure that you hit the thumbs up button, subscribe, and just say hi in chat. We'll also be taking some questions in a little bit, so if you've got questions you want to ask, feel free to drop them in chat, and I'll try to mark them as we go through our quick introduction. So hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
Jason.
Hey.
So first, I wanted to just give this to Andrew first because he just released something and sent me a link a second ago. I'm going to paste the link down here in chat, but I wanted to give you a quick second to just talk about what it is. What's the new thing that you just dropped?
This is the shameless plug part of the show. There's a new low poly monster bundle that we've released on the asset store. The link's down in the chat and in the place below. And it has 5 characters right now. It's low poly monster bundle number 2. It will have up to 20 characters as we add them. So now is a great time to buy them. The price won't go up except for the fact that it's on a new release discount, so it's 30% off right now. So that's the new pack. It's very exciting. So
it looks pretty cool. So this is a Minotaur, a demon, the Beholder guy. Is that Medusa that I'm seeing back there?
That's the Minotaur, the Devil, the Demoness / Succubus. At the time, the asset store wouldn't let me call it Succubus for some reason, so I call it Demoness. Okay. There's also the Gazer, not a Beholder. It's a Gazer. And there is one other. What's the one other? The other one is Bone Dragon, the Skeleton Dragon.
Oh, nice. Bone Dragon Skeletons. Well, that's very cool.
Yeah, so they all have the a color shifter tool involved. That's my tool that with my low poly stuff that lets you very easily change the colors for various parts of the model, save them, call them at runtime, export them as PNGs, and blend shapes, animations, etc.
So you can customize the crap out of them if you want?
Yep, that's the goal.
Sounds about like what I would expect from your stuff.
To be fair, there's a lot of work to get all that customization going.
Yeah, it's there's some back and forth with the artists when I work with them for sure, but we end up with a good product.
Yeah, you end up with something really cool and customizable, which is definitely neat. And then I think there are still some assets on sale too, right? I left the link down below.
Yes.
If I remember right, your character bundle was still available for like 75% off, unless it already sold out.
2 of them, they're getting close to being sold out. This is a flash sale. So on the asset store, you have to go to the sale tab and click on flash deals, and then there on the first page, there's 24 left of one and 34 left of the other. I guess now we know which one's more popular.
Oh, yep, you can see it right there. So it looks like bundle 8. Oh yeah, because it's got the mimics.
The mimics. I was thinking the same thing, because the mimics is not just mimics; it's also chests and loot.
Yes.
So you can turn off the mimics, and now you just have, I think, 13 or 11 different chests with gold and gem piles that, with blend shapes, you can make them tall, small, all this other stuff. So
yeah, I think that's just one of the things that, like, I think everybody that makes an RPG wants to do eventually. Like, if you make a fantasy RPG, you want to have chests that come to life and attack people because they've seen it too many times. It's hard not to want to do it.
Totally. Even if you don't want that part, you just need the chest still. I'm pretty sure I purposely put the mimics with the 2 monster creatures because those are less popular, the monster creatures. They don't even have names.
And to be fair, you want chests even if you don't have any dungeons or anywhere to place them. Like, even gacha games or whatever have you just drop chests for loot and, loot boxes. So it's one of the most globally usable assets because people like shiny things.
You need shiny things in games, yeah.
Yeah, it's one I remember seeing a long time ago, way before I even knew Andrew. I saw that one. I was like, that is a cool asset. I got to get that. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I got to use it. And I grabbed it, and I don't know if I think I played around with it in UIs mostly, having it pop open like you won something, like, oh, look, this chest opened up. Didn't attack you, though. Very cool.
The UI attacks you now.
Yeah, the UI. So, before we dive into anything too technical, I wanted to, if Jason's up for it, just bring up the topic that you were briefly talking about earlier, and that I was talking with a friend about, and another friend posted on Facebook recently about lottery tickets. It's in the title, and it's very probably confusing and not clear what the hell it means. Like, why are there lottery tickets in Unity? Do you want to take that and just dive into it, or you want me to open it up?
I think this is your. You start with it. I'll take it after you started.
Sure. So, one of the things, I guess, yeah, I'll start with. I actually swapped out my sign this morning just to go along with the theme. So, the post that I had read,
Close it up,
was
though.
mostly about luck versus skill, about whether or not success from releasing a game, building a game, or any of the other things that you do in life comes really from luck or skill, or that's pretty much the two options. And in reality, the post that my friend was talking about, it really comes down to I think luck, skill, and effort, right? Because people leave out the effort part and think that it's all luck and it's all skill. There's definitely some luck involved, without a doubt. Like, you get lucky where you're at, where you're born, who you're around, who your parents are. There's all kinds of different forms of luck that can totally give you more opportunities or shut down opportunities. Also skill, obviously. Some people are just naturally born with some magical skills that other people aren't. And it varies from person to person. It seems that each person has different skills. Finding the right ones that work for you matters a lot. But the other thing that really matters is actually getting out there and trying, like putting in as much effort as possible, trying different things. And what I generally like to recommend, and the rule I try to live by, is just say yes to as many things as possible. Just say, when there's no reason not to, just say yes to things, and try to do and experience and get through as much stuff as possible. Don't just say no, I don't know how to do that. Say yes, I'm going to try to figure out how to do that, and just keep putting in effort and trying a whole bunch of different things. When it came down to the lottery tickets, it really comes down to like how many that example was, like, each time that you're putting in this effort, you're going to somewhere, meeting some new people, trying out a different thing, applying for a new job, whatever the new thing is. Each one of these things is just another kind of ticket in the opportunity. And sometimes people just get a shitload of them. They're constantly out there trying to do things, trying to push these opportunities, and then eventually get lucky and get a hit. Sometimes people get it like right off the first one. Sometimes people never get it. But if you never actually try to get the tickets, never actually put out the effort, your odds go way, way, way down. So I think it's important that people just get out there, try things, say yes to things, go to events, talk to people, try to release the games, and do all of the things that, like, I don't know, just putting out effort. I don't know how to go any deeper on this. This is why I never make a video about it, because I feel like it's something important, but I don't know if I can get inspirational enough to just tell people to get out and do shit.
It's one of the
Yeah.
most fun topics out there.
It is an interesting topic. I will say it's an interesting double-edged sword, and I think you need to touch on both sides of it. One of my favorite kind of quotes is that if you ask somebody who's won the lottery, how do you get rich, they'll tell you to buy a lottery ticket, because it worked for them. They have a provable history on doing it, right? And so it's always saying be careful about whose opinions you buy, because everyone's got a story, and that's why anytime anyone's asked me how do you do a job like yours or what you're doing, I'll say, well, go back in time and start getting into VR, because that's what I did, and you can't, that world doesn't exist the same way anymore. And so that's never going to be, I'm never going to tell you how to be successful, because I don't know how to be successful. I just know what I did and how it ended up the way it did. I can give you general advice, but that's not the same thing. On the other end of the spectrum, though, you have to acknowledge that a lot of people out there are famous for getting a lottery ticket. But if you peel back the layers on that, it's a lot more complicated than it seems. My favorite example of that is Flappy Bird, which to me is one of the best examples of the dumbest scenario where a really simple game anyone could make was worth more money than sense. And it's very easy to go, yeah, right time, right place, made a game. It must have gone viral. That's the way the internet works these days. And it's like, yes, all of that's true. It was luck. It happened to go viral. It's not the most inspired game in the world, but it hit the right time. What people forget to mention is he made like 35 or 40 games. So he didn't just buy one lottery ticket. He'd been buying a lot, and one of them made him rich. So it's not saying that you're guaranteed to get successful, but it's saying that for every lottery ticket you buy, you at least have a slightly higher chance. And so to kind of jump onto what Jason was saying, my example of that is, I'll be honest, I'm bad at this. I'm not very good at capitalizing on things. I'm a very cautious individual, and I usually say the quote, I don't gamble much. I like to wait until the odds are in my favor before I do things. But what I will do is I will keep the door open and I will meet people where possible, and I'll try my best to be helpful. And that's my version of the same thing, which is the more opportunities you have to be useful and helpful, and the more skills you pick up and learn, these are just generally, they scale. And so the amount of times different scenarios have come up and something that I learned unrelated to the work I was doing got me the job, I can't count. So it's not just literally about applying for the more jobs or being in the most communities. It's generally doing things that will maximize your chances, right? And so, yeah, lean in effectively into what it is you want to do.
Yeah. I wanted to just point out too, you talked about not taking a lot of risks. I don't know. I feel like a lot of the time when we take good risks, it doesn't feel like we're taking risks, and we don't realize that we are. Maybe you don't really take a lot of risks, but I know that, like, personally, I find I generally recommend people take risks a lot, as long as the downside isn't like you got to look at the downside. I think a lot of time people avoid risks where the downside is like, it didn't work out, whatever, like, there's no real harm, I wasted some time and energy and I didn't go watch a movie or play video games for a week or whatever. I think a lot of the time people like misjudge those risks, or just like stay at a job forever because they're afraid they'll never get another job if they go apply somewhere. Like, I'm a big fan of just pushing forward some risk as long as it's reasonable and there's actual reward at the end too. So I don't like to take risks where there's no reward other than thrill. Like, I'm not driving 150 miles down the freeway because there's a risk, like, with no benefit, right? Like a huge risk with no benefit. I like low risks or medium risks with huge benefits and downsides that are manageable. As long as the downside's manageable, I say, take the risk if the opportunity is good enough, and don't avoid them all. And I'm going to say you probably do exactly these because you contract and run your own stuff. You don't just go work a full-time job.
Yeah, the contracting thing is probably the best example, because I very much was doing a job 9 to 5, and I would literally, I only left that job because of reasons where they literally couldn't give me more money. In fact, the person who hired me told me, you should leave. Like, the company as it stands can't do anything for you, and you're worth more than we're going to be able to give you. So that wasn't even me making a risk. That was me just doing effectively what I was told. But the risk I did take, and you're 100% right, is I joined various communities and met people and whatever. And then at one stage, through all of that stuff I said earlier, somebody turned to me and said, I have a project and I need you on it. And to do that, though, you'll have to quit your job. I need 6 months of your time, uncontested, but I can give you 2 years salary. And so that is very much me going, do I quit the safest thing I've known up to this point that I'm like slowly working towards to completely go off on my own? But like I said, it was 2 years salary. So to me, it was a calculated risk, because all I have to do now is within 2 years, I had to have found something else. I either have to continue doing this or I have to find another job again. And so to me, that's a very good risk, because it's a risk where, worst case scenario, I can spend those 2 years learning more skills, and then I'm back in the job market more experienced than I was.
Worst case scenario, that contract falls through and you go find another job, right? Like, you're in a month and they go, oh yeah, we didn't actually have the money. Everything fell through. But even then,
if I thought about it at the time, I may not have taken it.
That you could get back into another job making around the same or more anyway. So you would just have to do a little bit of extra work. The real risk for you was that you were going to have to do some more job hunting afterwards if it fell through.
And I think, honestly, like, if I could say this, the biggest bit of life advice I ever could give anybody is, I'm pretty employable right now. I've gotten to a point in my life where I can do web stuff if I want to. I don't want to, but I have enough experience. I could dive back in, spend 6 months or 3 months, and then I could take a job if I wanted to. And there's a bunch of jobs. I'm at the point now where I've done enough little things that there's probably about 150 different kinds of related tech jobs I could take any one of. And so I've minimized the risk I have in the scenario where certain things go wrong. And I think that, to me, is probably the most valuable thing, is just being able to have some kind of fallback position. So yeah, I definitely want to say I don't take risks, but I think there's a lot of people out there who will jump at a risk. I will test the waters, and I will then take some steps in the direction of the risk. I think that's the
Yeah,
difference.
I don't want to go overboard and risk everything every time. Like you sell your house and up and move, and take some invest it all into some startup thing. Like
Well,
I'm much more cautious than that, but not too
yeah,
crazy.
that would go against your advice of not doing things where the risk is too great. I think the where a lot of us fall into is the smaller risks, and where it doesn't necessarily feel like it's much of a thing. You mentioned playing a video game or seeing a movie versus saying working on a project. And I face this when I'm thinking about things for the asset store. Any new tool I put out there could technically be the next dynamic bone or something, where suddenly some VR chat says this is the tool for you, and then I could be a bazillionaire or something. The reality is I like playing video games from time to time too, and there's a couple that are very addictive. So every time I play one of those games for 5, 6, 7 hours straight, I'm risking that I'm not doing something else more productive. So it's a trade-off. You've got to take your risks, but it's a small risk. There are bigger risks. I would never risk going 150 miles on the freeway because I'm risking my life for no gain. I would also not risk going into an illegal enterprise with criminals because there's there's nothing there.
Well,
But
unless the reward is good enough, I mean, just by Jason Wyman's definition, right? If there's enough money in it,
Yeah,
you
what's
could go
the
full
cartel
Heisenberg, right?
offering you here, Andrew?
exactly. But in the
Be
end,
careful about where you tread.
yeah, in the end, I do, philosophically, I think it is all luck in the end, but you have to look at it in a certain way. The way we act in life, the way we react in life is all based on the lottery of our own births. And, whether you or I will jump at an opportunity or not is really based on who we are, which we didn't choose, how we were brought up, which we did not choose, how we react to things, which is largely something we don't choose. It is something we can work on. However, once people put that into your head that, hey, you don't choose how you react to things, but if you want to change that, you are able to change that so that later you react differently. That little plant is enough that somebody put in your head to maybe change that. So in the end, whether you go to a meetup and you talk to somebody, if you see Jason's story at a meetup and you're like, oh shit, it's Jason's story, I want to talk to him, I've got some ideas, he might not want to talk to me because I'm Mr. Nobody, and then you decide to go up and talk to him, and turns out that you guys are crazy compatible and you're friends and you do projects together, and now you're both gazillionaires after VR chat picks up your tool that you made. That's luck. You were there at the right time, and then you also made that decision to talk to him. Small risk, big reward. Small chance of that big reward. Most likely you'll just have a fine conversation, you'll go home, and that's that. But
yeah, most of the tickets don't pay off.
Yeah.
I mean, this gets into a totally different scale of trying to push the value that you do make, which is an entire skill of its own. Because there are people who have the biggest talent in the world, but they'll do nothing to convey to anyone. They'll never get the recognition that they deserve. And then in the end, nobody will know that they did this amazing thing. But then somebody can make a lower quality version of whatever they made, and they are way better at pushing the value that they do have. And suddenly they get way more popular, which is something that you do see with the mobile gaming trends. Like, small games can make amazing systems, and then big games can adapt those systems in a lower quality way, but become gigantic because they got more reach out of it. So it's a combination of skills in order to both have a skill to make something useful, push it to somebody else, and then making yourself be the center of it, so that you can benefit from the combination of skills you have. On that note, low risks and high rewards have a lot going into them. But one thing I want to mention is a lot of the ways that people think about risks, in my own opinion, is misguided. There are a bunch of things that you get value out of, even if they seem safe. staying and playing at the game could give you new ideas to create new systems that in the end could make you the new dynamic bone, or trying to talk to somebody can give you the thought of trying to make a new project. Every choice you make gives you certain values. It's just, what values do you want to have? Because even getting into a car crash can inspire you to do something that prevents car crashes for people. That happened.
I've been in
I'm
enough.
not
It
saying to
never
get into a car
inspired me.
crash, though. What?
Hey, Stephen King, Misery. It's car crash related for his story for that book.
Not
and
wrong,
one of his most
though.
famous stories, right?
So you choose what path you take, and you'll get certain stuff out of that path, but don't start thinking of certain paths as unnecessarily avoidable, if that makes any sense. And I just want to say that on stacking lottery tickets, which, by the way, the original conversation did happen regarding comparing big games with a lot of effort put into them, or 3D Lego, known as Minecraft. But this conversation happened because there's a lot of times that people don't judge somebody by the entire journey that they've taken in order to make something. They only judge them at a single point where they've first observed that person. Just like the Flappy Bird release, it's not the first game somebody made. But if you've never heard about them before, you'll think, oh, he made that one game. He has so much talent. And he obviously is a genius who thought about it just this at one time and it all happened. But no, the entire life brought him into that. He took 30-something chances just to get to that one point. He built up the skill. People exist and they're still making efforts even if you don't see them. And that's something that a lot of people have to remember, because this is one of the lead causes of imposter syndrome, which is you're seeing somebody who's better at you and stuff, and you're thinking, he is talented, I am not, I have to make a lot of effort just to be just as good as him. But that's not what's happening. He just made a lot of effort too. You haven't seen it.
Yeah, I've actually said this before, that to a little degree my YouTube channel is a bit of a lie, because it does quite well numerically, right? For people who've got as many videos as I have larger numbers than the average person starting out, and they're like, oh, you're clearly resonating, you're doing a lot of stuff right. And it's like, well, the secret is, well, one, I've been tutoring or teaching since my first year of college. I was tutoring people the same age as me. I was already doing programming and explaining programming and teaching it. I was learning VFX and compositing from Andrew Kramer from videocopilot.net all the way back in the 90s, doing that stuff. And by the time I had my own YouTube channel, I'd already done a podcast for 2 years on VR stuff. So I was used to talking and like getting more comfortable with this kind of presenting. And then the biggest secret is there were previously videos on my channel. Long before anyone had heard of me, I did make a series of YouTube videos, and they didn't do very well, and they were pretty bad, and I hid them in shame, like most people do when they create their first content. So my videos now, and the content I produced, is coming from 15, 20 years of me doing some form of video editing, some form of storytelling, some form of writing. I'm using a $400 microphone. Like this isn't, I didn't randomly make something that seems like a pretty good level. And that's something that I struggle with, is you look at someone else's work and think, oh, there's just so many things to learn. Even the lighting, even the setup, even the camera, and getting the audio normalization and learning how to present things and how to structure a script. And it's too much. It's just too much stuff. And so it's one of those things just to keep in mind that it's hard to measure yourself against somebody else who's been doing it for a long time. And so the quote was that if you get 1% better every time you do something and you stack up, you'll be surprised how quickly you'll get to, hundreds of times better. So it's don't compare yourself against someone else, because you don't know what their starting point is. Compare against you last week, and then you'll get a very clear indication of your progress.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, one trick I like to play with myself whenever I'm doing anything that's sort of an acquired skill. I think all skills are somewhat acquired, but whether it be, let's say, drawing, it's not drawing, but game making, if it's 3D art, whatever it might be that you're doing, I like to look back at what I did last year or 2 years ago. And if I don't look back and think, ooh, God, first of all, 2 years ago or a year ago, I was probably thinking, wow, that was pretty good. That was great. This is the best I've ever done. And if I don't look back a year later and think, oh my gosh, I made some mistakes there, then it means I'm not growing. And that's a sign to me that I need to either pivot or try a little bit harder, because we should always look back and think, ooh, we're better than we used to be in these things.
Though maintaining a good standard is still good. If you are proud of the original result and you manage to keep it, that's something. Don't degrade
Like
that.
a good RPG, you level up slower later on. And
on the point of acquiring skills and then showing them, as you mentioned, Jason, there's one more thing that I think we should mention, is that you mostly only see people at their best, and when they acquire their skills, they will have a lot of failures on the way, the journey as it's called, and you'll only see the result, the manifestation, the end, the victory of it. And when that happens, you'll think they are so talented and great, and I could never do that. But you didn't see all the steps that it took to have that. That happens all the time in development, by the way, when people are iterating on their mechanics, their content, their whatever you have. It's getting iterated on, and the release only has the final versions, which will generally be the one they're most proud of. In Terraria, we have a bunch of items that had more than 20 iterations throughout development. People only see the one in the end. We only make GIFs of the ones that we are most proud of, but there were failures on the way. There were things that are not as good. There were things that if somebody saw that, they will say they are not as talented. It's not, and on that point, the talent, quote unquote, is actually accumulated skill for the majority of people. There is no inherent talent of being able to make fancy looking swords as soon as you are born. It's something that doesn't even exist in the human mind at that point. You have to first understand that it exists, then say that you want to pursue it, then understanding why it's good, and then starting to be able to make that. All of those steps have to be made for every single one of these acquired talents, skills.
My favorite version of that, like the shortest one, is the first step to knowing something is not knowing it every single time. The very first step is not knowing how to do it.
And you don't know what you don't know, which is one of the most fun things to say in regards to acquiring talent.
Don't forget the first step of not sucking at something. You have to suck at it first.
Yeah.
Yep. That's...
The last step, go viral.
Oh, yeah. And one more thing before we jump from this topic. So, again, about stacking lottery tickets. You can, but I just want to make one very small point here, is that this is sunk cost fallacy. Because if we're talking about randomization, every single time you flip a coin, it's still 50-50. It's not because you failed one time, the next time is sure to be a victory for you. It's not going to average out. It's just that every single time you do this, you're still gambling.
Unless you do it all in 1 week and you buy all the combinations of every possible outcome. Guaranteed.
Hey, you sound like my friend in high school.
Yeah, but that's not gambling. That's a very costly experiment.
A sunk cost, you might say.
Yeah, that's a sunk cost, exactly.
That's called donating your money to the school system, Andrew.
Yeah.
At least here. So, Jason, you posted this link. I was trying to pull it up, but for some reason I can't get it to share. Are you able to screen share it? I just can't get it to play. It's not that it won't share. It's my my Chrome browser's all dying out on me.
You're muted, Jason.
Nope. I don't know if I have all of my sharing stuff is ready. I can try. Let's see.
Worth a shot. Mine just doesn't seem to want to play videos, just like it wasn't playing Andrew's.
Yeah. Okay. So let me see if this will. Settings.
Pop it up. And Jason's going to show a video of one of the first ones that he had, like the early videos.
How do you share anyway? I'm not seeing an option.
Just hit the little right next to the
camera. In full screen, it's not available. That's fascinating. Lesson learned. Let's have a look here.
All right.
Can you see that?
I can.
So this is yeah. Feel free to share that. Yeah. So this is more than just one video. This was something I made a while ago for my Ko-fi members as a fun look at production quality over the years. So I won't bother playing the audio because it's whatever, but you'll get an idea. This is me showing some of the first videos I did. That wall there in that video is this wall behind me. So before
Oh,
I started, there was nothing there. I didn't understand where to put a camera, so it's sitting on top of my bloody monitor looking down on me in the worst possible angle, and I now know 50 reasons why that's a terrible idea. The
it's
lights are
supposed to
blown
shoot up
out.
at your nose, right?
Exactly, there you go. This is obviously slightly improvement. I have the nice fancy background now, but the lighting's still terrible. The position's still terrible. I'm still looking in the wrong location. And so over time, you start to see it's kind of funny how the production quality will change. Add a bit of light now, so now there's separation between the foreground and the background. Camera angle still in a terrible place. So this is just a highlight that for everybody, myself included, there's lessons learned. There's horrible positions with the camera. Oh, there's me when I had no hair. That was another one. Yeah. So you get the idea. Just to highlight that even now it was like you take your time. Now we've got a good camera and we've got depth of field in the background, but it's slowly improving, right? So there you go.
And also, just to point that out, you already started that with charisma, which is something that you acquired prior to being on camera.
Yeah, as long as you do realize that was acquired, because I was literally a really quiet kid. That was that was hard fought as well.
As was I. I think
Hey,
I did
I'm
any talking
experimenting
in
here with
public
you.
until my first code event where I spoke, and I was nervous as shit. And then I realized it got easier and easier. But
By the way, on that note, I actually had no experience for public speech or being on camera before I met Jason Story and he started guiding me on all of this. So, like, I am standing on shoulders of giants and I'm getting all of his tips. Therefore, I'm getting less failure steps on my own journey.
hey,
Just saying,
you already
it's
have a
acquired.
good camera angle. You didn't need to wait 2 years to fix that.
He got to see all the
Exactly, yeah.
failures before they went public.
It's very cool. Well,
Thank you.
do you guys want to? Yora, you had a question that you wanted to talk about, right? So let's pop that one up.
Yeah.
Dive into something a little more technical. It was how are modders able to mod flat screen games like Elden Ring into being a virtual reality game? So how do they take something that wasn't made for VR and turn it into a VR game?
Yeah. So the biggest cheat about all of this VR stuff is that we're not really doing much when we're making something in VR. In the end of the day, humans have two eyes. Each eye is a camera. They have slightly different perspective because they're positioned differently and their default angle is a bit different. So when you're looking at something, you have a cross-matching reference of what it is from two different angles, and this is what ends up being the human vision. When you're working on VR, you just have something that renders for each eye from a slightly different position. You're basically only having two cameras from different positions trying to render for you. So all you have to do in order to make something VR compatible is position two cameras and showing each eye the contents of these cameras, which is at a slightly different position. This is the most basic step in order to make something that's not VR, be VR. You just have to hack camera position and hack rendering times so that you position it, render it, reposition it, render it, show it to both eyes. If the game supports having multiple cameras, you can already implement that. So it's trying to do that simultaneously, or there are advanced techniques for optimization about single pass rendering, which is basically trying to render both cameras at once instead of doing the entire process twice, which is more performant. But all of these things are unnecessary. All you're trying to do is get an end result, which gives you what you wanted. Now, this is just rendering in VR. The interaction that you see in first person and all of that is basically standard mod hacking of figuring out what position you want to place something in, then placing it there. So at the character's head, place where the camera should be. For the hands to be able to fight on your own, inverse kinematics, standard stuff. If you're trying to do character interaction with things, way more complicated depending on the game. But if you're just controlling the character standardly and you're just placing the head where the camera should be, you have VR experience.
Yeah, and in fact, actually, you technically don't even need both cameras. If you can get away with it, you can render it once. You'll just get a really flat and dull image. And so back in the day when I was really into VR, there was third-party products. There was 3 different companies who were all making middleware applications that you would launch that would basically take over control of rendering. And so those ones were really interesting because they weren't modding the game particularly. They were just messing with DirectX as how DirectX is rendering. And so any game that used DirectX, you would literally open up and attempt to be VR. But what was interesting about that is there's a lot of weird bugs that happen because, for example, a lot of game engines will use camera culling. And so even though you're controlling the camera using an external input source so it moves with your head, the world doesn't know that you're supposed
Supposed to drop off.
Talk about luck right there, huh?
That was
Yeah, reverse lottery tickets.
an interesting time, and we just lost Jason mid-sentence.
Yeah. So, just continuing talking about VR stuff. One pitfall that we'll get to Jason's bit later, but when you're rendering in VR, there are still pitfalls because a lot of render. Oh, there we go. He's back. Continue.
Damn my internet. Sorry, how far did I get before my internet killed me?
That's a good question to explain. So we were talking about trying to lift up the
middleware is where we were at.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So what I was saying was there is, in general, if you take a game that's like a normal top-down game and you wanted to see what it's like in first person, literally it's just moving the camera. Like, even before we get to VR and before we get to the complicated things, at the end of the day, if you think about the steps happening here, it's create a model, place the model in the computer somehow for rendering, put it into memory, and then draw it somehow. Choose some calculation that says, from this position, look at it, shape, calculate things I have to draw, and draw it. So conceptually, to mod or hack a game to draw differently, you just have to figure out a way to take that step and draw it differently, or move the camera, or do whatever. And what I'm getting at is, there's a lot of big first-party mods where they do a lot of like literally rewriting the game code, but there's also the games are using something to render. And so you've got OpenGL or DirectX, which is basically handling a lot of stuff for the concept of whoever's built the game on top of those technologies. And there's other technologies which can effectively hijack that and change how the cameras are drawing. And so back in the early days of VR, you could take any game in your Steam library and attempt to run it. And you had about a 30% success rate that your game would run with the camera mapped to your head. For some games, that would completely detach the camera, and you'd basically be looking free, and your character would move around ahead of you. For other ones, it would attempt to do it in first person, and you'd get mixed results. But suffice to say, it's basically just that, and you get a very flat image. So you'd have to do extra kind of cheeky work to render the game twice, and then put the two images, and then get your difference, and that's what you get the stereo view. So it is doable, but I guess my point is it was interesting because when you would do that with a game like Metroid, there was a Dolphin VR, which I still think is one of the coolest projects I've ever seen. It is a emulator that makes every game in it VR. So that is an extra level of confusion. Console games being remade in a way that can be played in VR. And if you never played Wind Waker VR, it's flawless. It's like a first-party game. It's amazing. And so that you can walk around, you can see the camera, and you can see the world in a completely different way. But Metroid, on the other hand, had really aggressive camera culling. So when you're not looking at something, the entire world would disappear. But its understanding of the frustum was calculated differently than you would for a human eye. Like if you've got whatever the lens of the character in the game will have a certain FOV, human eyes, you'll make it bigger. And so as a result, you can see the world flicking out of existence in the periphery of your vision because you are now seeing more of the world than the game actually thinks you can. So that's how you do it, but there's some interesting side effects.
Yeah, and on side effects, one thing that you'll find with trying to hack VR into a game that didn't have it is that single camera rendering games do this common trick, which is in a lot of games, which is billboard rendering. When you're trying to render something that always faces the camera. This is used for VFX mainly when you're trying to draw a lot of particles that fly up. They are actually square meshes, quads, where because you know that you only want to render the texture to the player so that they always see it, the mesh should always face the camera so that you don't see the side of it where it's flat and there's nothing to see. Because doing 3D models is very expensive, etc., etc. This is the approach that most games take. But if you are rendering the square towards the camera and you have two cameras, discrepancies will start showing up, especially as it gets closer to the face, because one has to render in this angle and one has to render in that angle. They'll cross each other, they'll look weird, and your eyes will discern that something is wrong, and it will massively screw with your mind. This also happens not just with billboarding, but with effects that take the camera position into account. Because if you are, say, trying to do stylized rendering where you have flat shading, cell shading, and there's a sharp cut of light and dark, and it's using the camera position in order to decide where it is, then it's going to be different for each eye. Basically, trying to do VR for games that didn't intend it is difficult, and when you're trying to make an experience for VR, you have to consider not using any of these because you can't, because they're different for each eye. So a lot of games will try to opt for making a point between the eyes and using that as the intermediary single point concept.
Which is necessary for a number of reasons, because the other thing that you don't think about is in the real world, there's foveation. So when we see the world, you don't really think about it, but you're seeing the pinpoints where you're looking forward with perfect clarity, and everything else looks like this, that like blurriness when my hand goes in front of the screen, because your eyes don't need to process all of this at the same resolution. And so as you move around, that's what that sort of depth feeling you get.
Oh, called again.
Yeah. So to continue what he was saying, when you're moving around, your eyes don't necessarily need to see all the detail in all the spots. And one of the things that you can do when that happens, I don't know if that's the point he was trying to go for, but because your eyes are only focused on a single point at any given time, we can say we don't need to spend the rendering performance on rendering everything around every single pixel of the camera perfectly. We can render at a higher quality around where you're looking, at a lower quality everywhere else, to save on performance and to have a better experience. Cheats, but for performance. Do you want to continue from where you were?
Yeah, where was I?
You were talking about your eyes and you're not looking
Foveated
at
rendering and
Yes,
foveated vision.
Yeah, so this is just generally to say that in the real world, you focus on things and there's a distance and there's a level of understanding that certain things are further away or closer to you. And what you don't really think about, it's a weird thing to say from a VR perspective, but if you're putting a VR goggles up to your face, it's perfectly clear. It's about as close to your eye as you can get. And because the thing on that screen is perfectly clear, the world it's representing is perfectly clear. And so the image you see is a world with no depth. And this is very jarring. And that's why there's this hyper realness to VR, which makes people a bit jarring. Because it's like, everything's crisp. And that's not the way the world works. The world tends to be fuzzyish on the outside and sharp on the inside. And so this is something that they're working at. A lot of VR headsets are trying to do that. Because it's not only good for realism, it's also good for literal performance if you don't have to render.
Yeah, you don't have to render.
You don't render the stuff that you can't see, right?
Yeah, that's calling to not render the stuff you don't have to see. But if it's still on camera and you're not focusing on it, then why render it for higher quality? Generally speaking, that's why we want to have eye trackers in the VR headsets, so that we can have the eye direction information, so we can say this is actually far away from the direction. Don't really bother with it that much.
You can render the part that you're staring at super HD, like the text or whatever thing it is that you need to see. You can see it really, really good, and then offload the rest to just lower res versions of stuff. And
and just to touch on why we care so much about performance in VR is that when you are rendering in VR, you're doing a lot of rendering work. Not only do you have to render for two different eyes, you also have to render at a higher frame rate, because humans get really motion sick from slow experiences in their reality. If your head bobs and it's doing all these micro movements, then you want to be able to feel all of that as you're moving. The camera only updating once every 30 frames is going to be immensely sickness inducing. So we have to save on performance wherever we can. And to do that, we want to have as much information on what we can skip on. So that's why you see all of these techniques and stuff regarding trying to save information. Jason Story is restarting his PC in order to see if that helps with the issues having.
Cool. I wanted to mention one last thing on the VR part before Jason gets back. Maybe he'll come back before we finish it. But was that on your frame rate mentions, like you've got to stay at 75, but you also have the side effect of you can't dip down below. Normally in a game, like you can run at 100 frames a second. If one frame dips, it might suck if it's a multiplayer game, but it's probably not going to matter. in a VR experience, it's going to cause weirdness and make people nauseous and sick, or at least some subset of people, if you even drop a frame or two down below. So you got to be really careful on that.
In games where you're really physically active, it can actually make people fall, which is something that happened to me twice in Beat Saber.
Wow.
So that was scary. One thing that
sounds scary.
one thing that's really interesting though is that at least with the Vive, Valve made it so depending on different situations, they'll just clear out your screen, put you in a void for that split second, just so that you don't get the stuck experience. They're giving you feedback that you actually got a stuck, but without stucking you.
Yeah, without making you sick, ideally.
Yeah.
So let's take another camera-related question, if you guys don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
You guys got any thoughts on this one? Any tips or tricks for dealing with and debugging a jittery camera?
Yeah. So, there's a lot you can do there. I'm going to start by saying that I can already guess the most common reason that people have jittery cameras, which is to say mismatched camera and character update, or rather tracked object update cycles. One thing that I see a lot of people do, which is wrong and difficult to understand, is that in Unity at least, you have multiple versions of how to update something: the update, fixed update, and late update. And not all of them tick at the same rate. So if your character is moving smoothly every single update of the game, which is also used for the rendering, but the camera is updating in a fixed update, which is not every single frame of the game, it's going to be showing the character and the camera matched. Then the character is moving slowly forward every single frame, but the camera has to catch up in ticks, in jumps. And those discrepancies in movement, because the camera doesn't always jump and the character always jumps, is what's going to feel jittery. Other things that can cause this jitteriness relate to how the inputs themselves update. A lot of people don't think about it, but when you have a high input polling rate, some games will actually try and process each request as soon as it arrives, and that's going to make the things that rely on the input update way more frequently than other things. This is actually a problem with the new input system package, with the polling for mouse coordinates in Unity for some users in the editor, where if you're going to try and have a super high mouse polling rate, it's actually going to give you jitters in the entire editor whenever you're trying to use those inputs, which mainly manifests when you're moving a camera, because that's what we use for mouse inputs usually. So these are the two most common things I know about causes of jittery camera. As for debugging, usually you can just draw stuff. Gizmos work. If you're trying to give yourself information on what you're aiming at and why is it going wrong, try to pick the most frequent way you know where your debug display will be called, and start looking for trends, because trends will tell you a lot. For example, if it's only jittering when a character is about to jump or when they're jumping, then you know that it's somehow related. You can look for the related code there, just as an example. There's also the order of execution of methods. So if your camera is always updating after the character, it's always going to show the exact right position for the character. But if it's updating before the character, it's always going to be one frame late. And when it's one frame late, it might also introduce behaviors that you don't expect, like trying to follow a character that's about to bump into a wall and figuring, well, he's just going to run forward and I'll extrapolate with him. But then they get stuck into a wall and you have to move back because the prediction didn't come true.
The inverse is true as well with late update, right? You might finish your camera update in update and then do late update stuff to finalize those kinds of weird issues, and then you're back in the same problem.
Yeah, actually, on that point, Kinematic Character Controller, the one that we know and love, does that. It's updating things in late update for a system to interpolate all the character positions. And if you don't set the execution priority, you can end up doing things in late update that are still before kinematic character updates, and then you're still one frame late. Or rather, one sub frame late. It's really frustrating when you don't know that. So
Well,
Yeah.
you guys want to move on to the next question? I think that was a pretty
Sure.
good jitter-related answer, unless anybody had more to follow up on there.
This is a good path of questions. Go take it one after another.
Yeah. Let's take a real quick easy one. Should you upgrade to Windows 11?
I haven't.
I don't think my Mac will run it.
Well, I've upgraded my laptop. I've had no problems yet. I'll probably upgrade my desktop very soon. Actually, I might have already upgraded it and not noticed, but I know I didn't because the bar's not in the center. So I'm going to upgrade mine just to get the bar centered, the start menu centered on my ultra wide. I haven't run into any issues with it development wise though lately. So I would say if you're not like if you're about to ship something, in the next month or two, don't obviously because don't make any big changes. But other than that, I think it's probably pretty stable. It seems like it's good. Most people I know have upgraded and haven't had problems yet. Nobody's told me about any problems, so I guess maybe we'll see if there's something else going on. But anybody else have thoughts on this?
It's one of the most commented things that my very first video was on Windows 11. Didn't occur to me as a big deal. It was just, it's available, I'll use it. And as I state in that video, I regularly just wipe my computer back to zero because I think it's a good mental practice because it means I have to remind myself to put everything important on the cloud or an external store. It means if my computer gets wiped, I should only lose a small amount of data. So it's kind of like a personal thing. I like the clarity of that. And so when I was updating, I was like, yeah, it's Windows 11. I can update. It's not going to be a big issue. So yeah, I've been on Windows 11 since before my YouTube channel started, and it's fine. It's more Windows. I'm not noticing any vastly different. There's a couple of bugs at the start, and it endlessly drives me insane that I can't move my start bar to the top of the screen like I used to for about 10 years. But I've kind of gotten used to it now at this stage. I don't even use it anyway. I use Launchy, it's a side note, is for my app launcher. But yeah, it's fine. It's more Windows. I'm not noticing anything vastly different one way or another.
Yeah, I haven't had any problems at all either. Oh, I expect the only people that'll have problems are like the typical audio engineers who have the weird old hardware that doesn't work with anything but Windows 98. But usually when I run into people that have upgrade problems, that's it. They have some really weird esoteric software or hardware that doesn't have drivers or USB support for anything except for some specific old OS. So yeah, I'm all for upgrading. Let's see what else we've got here. Somebody asked what beard oil you use or recommend. I'm going to pass this on to Jason's story because I have no idea. I just use water.
Unironically, I very recently picked one up, so I don't know the name of it though. It's some random one. I'll let you know. I'll let you know next time. I'll make a note, but it's fine. It's just something someone suggested I get. So.
Oh yeah, I just use soap. I don't know.
I raise my beard with fire.
Whatever comes on my skin.
Well, you know what? If we get to like maybe 300 likes by the end of the video, I'll shave it. I'll shave my beard off too. I don't think it's realistic, so I've picked a number that people won't be able to reach. So yeah, if you guys can get to 300 though, I'll even record shaving it off.
Just one last note on the VR thing because I missed my my last conversation with it. Someone made a comment saying that one of the biggest issues with VR assets is moving at all, like grabbing stuff, causes it to jitter. This is actually interesting, and I specifically bring this up because this is research done that wasn't mine, but I learned a lot from. There's a series of games in VR, and from I think it's the Cloudhead, might have been them. No, it's the other studio. The guys who make Job Simulator and that series of games, and they wrote a fantastic article back in the day where they basically said, we have this problem. Our entire game is physics based and VR, and we have to solve this like horrible VR grabbing thing. And they went through this huge example of, well, what if we snap it to your hand? Okay, works. Physics doesn't work. Get a bit janky. Okay, what if we set the velocity directly? And this, by the way, Alchemy, thank you very much. And this is actually what the majority of games that do, is they basically manually set the velocity of the object. And so what that does is any physics calculation the object was doing is overridden. So if an object is falling and you reset the physics, it'll just keep jumping back. But unless you're also resetting the angular velocity of what it's building up, it's going to keep moving further away from you and eventually do this weird jitter. So a lot of people in the cheaper assets will do the easy solution, which is just slap it directly onto the hand. The more advanced solution is to do that idea that is with the physics. But even that's not ideal, especially when you've got multiple colliders on an object. And so the roundabout kind of correct answer, or the best you can do, is every collider you have on your object registers itself with some kind of global collection or dictionary. And those register themselves with an object. So if you've got an object like a sword built with multiple shapes, it's actually really registering each collider with one parent root object. Then when you go to pick up that one object, you don't assign the position directly. What you do is you move that object so it interpolates to your hand or the position with which you're doing it. Now, depending on your game, you might set a high pull rate and have it move to the hand. And the benefit you get from that is where if you push your hand up against a surface, the object won't go through it, but your hand will. And so you can have some limit where if your hand pushes too far, it'll snap that connection and the object falls. And that gives you the most organic feeling. Stuff stays with your hand, but depending on the way you tweak those values, it can feel floaty because it feels like the object's not really in your hand. So you need to make sure that that rate is quite high. So what some people do to solve that problem is they'll interpolate it to your hand and then clamp it to your hand. And so while it's in your hand, it's a non-physics object, but when it's outside your hand, it is a physics object. Things like swords, that makes sense, but things that you're throwing around doesn't, because you get into weird territory where you can like push into a door and things. Anyway, yeah, so there's a very detailed rant about the specifics of jitter in picking up stuff in VR that, again, I can't take any credit for. It was a really detailed, GIFs included the whole way through article from Alchemy ages ago. And yeah, I was really delighted because I was looking for the solution. I didn't know how to do it. I was going through all the same experiments, and I find this blog, and they're like, "Oh my god, they've done everything I've done, and like 6 more steps. This is great. I can just steal their research afterwards."
Shoulders of giant.
All right, Yorai, this one's for you and Jason, but I wanted to give you a chance to hit it first. How do you guys store all this valuable knowledge in your brain? Do you back up to the cloud every evening? Yeah, people probably assume that you just memorize everything. Do you just sit around and read books, or what do you do? What's the reality here?
The reality is, I was actually memorizing and forgetting a lot of these things into and having dump projects, which once in a while I look at because I'm crazy and I'm hoarding everything I ever made since I was a kid. But recently, I moved to a much better strategy, which Jason Story taught me about, which is Obsidian. Jason, do you want to explain about that?
Yeah, I guess so. To kind of cycle back to my own personal journey with this stuff, is I didn't have a computer growing up, and the only computer I had access to was in my local library, and you had to take an hour, like pre-book, go in and use it. And so I had very little internet access, and so I needed to get as much information as I could because I really liked computers. And then later on, I got access to another computer at it was like a community center type thing, and that one allowed me to actually use USB sticks and things, which I couldn't do in the library computer. And so I ended up realizing, okay, I need to get as much stuff. At this stage, I got my own home computer, no internet. So now I have a computer, no internet, and I want to get stuff from the internet. And so I used to bring stacks of floppy disks over, and I would copy stuff, but the file sizes are tiny, so you'd have to take files, HJ zip them down to like small sizes, bring them back, whatever. So all of that's this
1.4 meg files.
1.44, yeah, but you don't want to hit 1.44 because if you do hit the 1.44, you might cause it to corrupt and then you lose the whole stack. So you want to make sure it's 1.3.
Right?
Yeah.
Anyway, I gotta ask, did you have one of those carrying cases for your little discs?
I did, but the carry cases tended to be too big because they tended to be like sizes of 50 or 100, and I was bringing like 30, and it just made more sense to put. You know what I used? I used a CD case, like a zip CD case, because it was like a handy form factor for copies. But yeah, so that's what I used to do. So I used to hoard stuff too, but it was out of necessity because I had no access to the internet. But what I did learn is that once I started having access to the internet regularly, I couldn't take it with me. So it was more about Google Foo. Can you get back to your stuff quickly? And I learned that's the name of the term, Google Foo. It's like, what is your ability to very quickly acquire, find, and search? And so I would say step one is I got very good at that. If I saw something 6 months ago, I could vaguely remember the steps I took to get it back. I wouldn't remember where it is or what it was. I just have to remember the kinds of searches I used, the terminology, and get better at using those. And so I got pretty good at doing that stuff, but I kept wanting to store things, and I just couldn't find a good solution. I used Evernote, all the other ones just didn't really work for me. Until I learned about the concept of personal knowledge management. And that's apparently the term I've been needing my whole life, which is the name for storing all of the stuff that you want to keep and retain. And I started looking into it, and there's a whole bunch of different tools and solutions, and this has been going on for years. Lots of great tools. The one I settled on is called Obsidian, and I'll make a video about it someday. But it's effectively it's the difference between people look at Notepad and then you talk about, say, Visual Studio as a powerful tool to like program things. Well, to me, Obsidian is like the same thing. It's a powerhouse of taking the concept of writing a text note and exponentially making it more powerful. You've got all these search filters and real-time linking, plugins, custom styling. It's everything you'd ever need to take notes, but like tenfold. It's too hard to explain as a thing, but let's just say it's... Sorry, go on.
To take a small take on that, when you're comparing Notepad to Visual Studio, you're saying this is an interactive development environment where I want to write a solution. It's going to offer me the tools that I need in order to make that solution work, run, tells me if I did anything wrong, etc. For Obsidian, it's like Notepad, but it's going to give you all the tools that you need to have information kept. So if you try to make a list, it can actually give you bullet points for that list or numbered lists and can format things for you. If you're trying to make links to other documents, instead of saying, go look at that position, it's going to give you interactive links for that other position. And it's also going to provide autofilling for that information from the files that are available. If you're trying to include images, instead of just dropping a PNG into a folder, into MS Paint, saving it, and then putting it in proper folder, you can just paste it and it will both put it in a folder that is nearby and give you a hot link with a preview for that one point. It's a power tool for making notes and keeping them.
Yeah, and I would say the number one selling point, aside from, yes, obviously I'm a power user, I have millions of plugins, I've written my own custom JavaScript tools for it. That's not the point, and that's not what I should sell it on. If I was to sell it on for anybody, it's that the way I used to take notes, even right up until 2 years ago, was I would be working with a client or talking to somebody and we'd be having a meeting. I would literally bring up, not Notepad, because it's not that bad. I would use Visual Studio Code, or I would use brackets, or I would use Sublime Text. All of these are code editors, but they have note-taking functionality. And it had a really great feature, which is if you open one of those editors, type random text and just close it, you don't even have to save a file. The tab can stay open with the notes just vaguely there. And I just did this. I just had tabs open with stuff and notes. But every so often you'd close it and forget to save something, or something would crash, or you'd eventually really know you had to save it out. So you'd save it on the desktop as like notes. And you just have files that called stuff and notes and things and to do. And then eventually they'd get put in the subfolders and you'd never find them. And the number one feature that to me sells Obsidian more than anything else is the idea of linking. So you make a note, and just like a wiki article or something, every note that you have, if you start typing, you can reference that other note. You don't have to go find it, you don't have to drag anything in, just the act of typing for it will say, oh, I have another note with either this word or this topic in it, will I put it right here? And it appears. And so then you get this network building of all of your related concepts. There's even a graph it'll show you where everything connects to everything else. And so it means someone like me who's relatively forgetful, I can just say, oh, here's a topic. I just saw a really great video on, for example, one of my favorites is Dave Tech's stuff on level design for characters and character controllers. So I make a note. I want to store this thing about character controllers. And I go to put it into my notes. And there's a thing that says, oh, you already have notes on game design and character controllers. You want to link these things together? I'm like, yes. And so next time when I go to look for that stuff, it's not a random sea of text files somewhere that I may or may not find. It is a related connection of relative ideas. And so the kind of takeaway for me is the power is not in storing information. If you want to store information, you can. Every one of us can make a folder and put some files in it. That's half the equation. The more important half is recall. Recall is way more important than the storing. And to be able to recall, you can either be good at refinding it, which is what I was originally basing my skills on, or you can be good at building a link to it so that it's even easier to find. And so that's what I ended up settling with. I haven't done the video on Obsidian yet, but there's another tool I use called Eagle. And I do have a video on that. If you haven't seen it, the most recent video on my channel will give you an idea of the kinds of stuff we're talking about. It's basically a way for you to hyperlink between your data. So I highly recommend one way or another looking into this. Somebody somewhere in the chat is going to say, but there's also LogSec and there's also Notion, and there's a lot of apps now. There's a lot of things that do the same thing. You don't have to pick any one of them. My point is, and it's the conclusion I made in that video, is your brain is not very good at storing information. It is very good, though, at problem solving and refinding things. And so what you want to do is as soon as you've solved something, You want to put it somewhere else that's not your brain that you can get back to later. And so step 1 is putting it out of your brain, and step 2 is making it easy to find again. And the way to make it easy to find again can be entirely up to you. Some people use folder structures, some people use tags, some people use labels, some people use searches. And the reason I like Obsidian is you can use all of them. So I can use tags to say, like, on Obsidian, this is a topic about game dev, this is a topic about emulation, this is a topic about level design. I can put it in a folder about a particular project or company I'm working with. I can link it to other projects that are related in various different things. And so the avenues with which I can refine the valuable information is exponential, because I can have searches and filters and tags and labels and a million different things, and I can use as much or as little as I personally like. And final note on this, there's a million ways to do this, but there's actually specific patterns and strategies. Like anything else in life, people like myself, I'm just struggling with this. I'm just leaning in now and getting used to the idea. There's people who've been doing this stuff for years. There's research on the act of taking notes. There's books written on the process of how do you process the idea of taking notes. And so there's a lot of philosophies out there. One of the biggest ones is called Zettelkasten. And it's a very specific method of note-taking that uses it's like a key card approach. It's like, I won't go into that, the whole thing. My point is, research this. It's a whole thing to look into, but you'll be surprised. And it's interesting, but just the general takeaway is just don't rely on your brain to recall information. Either get good at finding it, or put it somewhere and get good at finding that. One way or another, make it easier for you to get information back at.
Yeah, and on that note, one other power tool of Obsidian with recalling information is that you have a search where you can put literally anything and it will look indexedly at all of the information that is stored in it to give you all the related results. It's like Google, but for your mind, only the things you kept. And this is extremely powerful. One other powerful tool that you've mentioned to me before is Void Tools Everything, which does the same, but for your entire local computer. And that has been immensely useful for me to find the random scripts I have that I never bothered logging, but they have a good enough name that I remember they exist. So I can just type their name and it's somewhere on my PC in seconds. The speed at which you can recall the information is really important, because it doesn't matter how much you keep if you can never find it again after you want to. So this is one of the best things about Obsidian, and on Eagle it's the same but visually. So if you have a bunch of images, it's like a gallery to see all of the images in your collection almost at once, and you can also tag them based on what you're looking for to have an easier time finding them. Now, recently I had a case where I wanted to pull information because I was trying to teach somebody about a topic so they can write me an article about it, a very long one. And I decided I'm going to look at all my available references, all the images I ever saved, to figure out what can I give them as reference. It was a creative work, so I had to explain, here's what I like, here's what I dislike. And I am hoarding a lot of information. So just in the past 2 years, I had 18,000 images that I had to go through. And I went all through them one by one just to figure out which reference to keep them. And those tools help you do that way faster. Because if you have different folders, different locations for things, you don't remember where you put everything. This is one of the biggest problems with manually logging all of your information, is that you don't remember where you placed it. You'll just go to the nearest dump that you had at the time, and those might change as you swap PCs, as you swap the way you do things. So tools that automatically find everything for you, group it in a way that you want to look for it, and do that quicker than the default available manual option are useful. Now, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think what's really interesting to me, at least, is I think this topic, this is a very deep philosophical conversation, and I want to highlight this because I think it's one of those things that gets glossed over as this is a nice tool you can use sometimes. I want to make this really clear, is that to me there was a eureka moment where it's like completely changed the way I approach information. And I've said this long before this stuff, but one of the biggest things I've learned in my life is the power of friction and how bad it can be. And I've said this in numerous different scenarios where if you're compiling something and it takes 20 seconds, you'll probably spend that time getting up and making a coffee, maybe having a chat with somebody, and that 20 seconds will eat 40 minutes of your time. And so every time a small little bit of friction creeps in, you won't do it. If you're if you're going to go for a walk every day and you're trying to be healthy, but then your shoes are upstairs, you're like, oh, I'll have to go upstairs to get my shoes. Never mind, you won't do it. That little bit of friction is just enough to stop you doing something you should be doing. And so if those shoes were beside the door, you might go, oh, well, it's right here. I have no excuse. And so in general, friction is one of the most dangerous things for you and any goal or objective you have. And one of the things that you don't see as a friction, but was like my life-changing kind of thing, is folders. You start out by making folders to put stuff in as a necessity, like literally just to move them into vague places. But later on, that feels wrong. You want it to be more organized. So you start trying to be too smart for your own good, and you start making folders and subfolders and nested subfolders, and you make this really clever hierarchy of things until you can't find your own stuff in your own folders because you've made like 12 nested deep structures of hierarchies. And again, this makes friction and it makes you not want to do things. And so it wasn't until I realized that folders is a paradigm. It is one way to store and deal with information. Another one is tags. It's a completely different way to approach information. You tag things, you search for tags, you find things by tags. The third one is search. Like literally you type in a thing, you get back search results. And when you realize these aren't just different like ways of approach, it's like fundamentally a different paradigm for how you approach information. You will structure things differently, think about things differently, and find them differently. And so now, and that's the whole thing too, you can get into what is a tag, and there's the concept of strong link versus weak link, and then there's the concept of maps of content, and like there's a whole, this is a whole rabbit hole to go down. All I'll say is that it makes you recontextualize your relationship with information, and it's something worth doing because you'll be surprised. Like the reason people ask me, why do you use Eagle and Obsidian if one of them does the job or whatever? And I would say I use the right tool for the right job. I use, we talked earlier about everything, so that's by Void Tools. I use that because it means if I wrote a script in some project for some client, and it's like my own file of stuff, and I'm like, oh, I did a thing before where I interacted with the camera and I was trying to do this camera fading thing. I don't remember what the script was. I can just type camera star.cs, and every single file on my computer that's a C# file will just appear with the word camera in it, and I can find it. No friction. Instantly find anything camera related. So that's why I use that. If I want to search for a file or a folder, I find it. Similarly, the same thing goes for searching for my images and things and my YouTube links. That's what Eagle's for. If there's someone asks for, hey, what was that website again? Or what was that really cool YouTube video you watched? It's on Eagle. I find it, paste the link, it's there. If it's my own notes and my own information and my own like processing, how I'm going to make references for YouTube videos, that's in its own stuff in Obsidian. So right tool for the right job. The last one I'll say is a tool is I use something called Launchy. Again, for friction, is I use Launchy and it pops up a little search bar. It's like GNOME do back in Linux. And I use that because you can actually register search engines in it. And what I mean by that is if I want a certain asset on the Unity Asset Store, I can just press Alt space, type UN, press tab, type in a word like tree, and it will open my browser, open the Unity Asset Store, type in the word tree, and show me the result set for trees. And I can do the same thing with Epidemic Sound for music for my YouTube videos, and so on and so on. So it's all about just finding these little moments of friction in your life and finding the right tool to solve it. I think for most people, Obsidian will do 99% of that. You don't need the other tools. If you're willing to be a power user and go a bit nuts, there's other tools to help with that.
Yeah. Generally, though, just indexing searches and being able to recall from that is already a gigantic speed boost. Like literally just try that one first step. You'll never want to go back to not doing this. As for somebody who keeps mentioning OneNote, I just want to explain that the reason specifically between all the tools why I like Obsidian is because I can make local libraries and they're as simple as I want them to be. They're nothing more than what I tell them to be. And they're only local. So if I don't want something online, I don't have to with Microsoft and whatever have you. And if I do want, it has version control. I can just put it up there on personal GitHub or whatever I want, because it's just markdown files in the end of the day. The simplicity of it is appealing. It's literally nothing more than personal preference, though.
It is worth noting, because that's a feature that, quite frankly, doesn't really matter to me, but it's a lot of people love that feature. So just for clarification, most services like this, whether you're talking Notion or OneNote or any of those, or Evernote, all of these are a cloud-based solution with a payment service that you pay to some company to store and manage your notes. If you stop paying, you probably lose access, or at best, you can't add new ones. And you have to getting it back might require you to download from them or whatever. But Obsidian it's kind of like a way of seeing a folder. A folder, it's just a folder full of text files. You can open that folder in an Obsidian app and it will appear as an Obsidian application. And so that's all there is to it. It's a series of text files in a folder, and it's up to you to get as complex or as not. In my case, I've gone a bit further, and there's like a plugin for Obsidian that uses Git. You can then make a Git repo. You can then have it set to auto timer tick to make Git pushes and pulls, and so you can turn it into a cloud-based solution if you want. But even that's still under your control because in your Git repo, and it's all managed. And then you can even synchronize with other people, and they could pull down the same repo and get changes. It's just a lot more customizable and powerful. Again, not a particular big deal for me personally, but it's like a big selling point for some people.
Yeah.
I want to pop up a question for Andrew real quick because it's one of my favorite ones that Andrew gets to answer often, and I think it's worth answering because he's got some stuff that he just published. And it was, is it a good idea to sell my game assets before I publish it? Like to make money? And Andrew's been quiet for a little while. Bring him in. And this is something that you actually do and are doing now, right?
It is, exactly. Yeah, so I think the answer is clearly yes, for a couple reasons. And so before publishing the game, I'm assuming it is the game. So you're making a game, you're having assets made, maybe you're paying somebody, maybe you're making them yourself. And should you sell those assets on the asset store to others to make games with before your game comes out? I think the answer is yes. Some people will say no because they want their game to be released with brand new assets that nobody's ever seen before. It's unique. It's all that. Reality is, let's be honest, most of us won't actually finish our game. And those that do finish the game, most of those games will not be large commercial successes. So you need to make some money along the way. Unless you are lucky enough to have a trust fund, then you need to make some money along the way. And if you're spending money to get these assets made, that's a real cost. And it, I don't know your financial circumstances, but for me, it was, hey, I have a chunk of savings, and once this runs out, I need to get a job. And so even with selling my stuff, I still had to get a job. But the reality, it comes down to, giving you more time to make your game by making some money back from your stuff. Maybe you'll make enough money to pay what you spent. Maybe you'll make enough money and you'll stop making your game and you're going to start selling assets full time or something like that. But I think it's perfectly fine. And I think the reality is people who buy your stuff, a lot of them, maybe one of them will have a commercial success with your stuff, and everyone, your game will come out and be like, oh, there's the dragon that was in that other game that everybody knows about. That's possible, but it's unlikely. The reality is everyone, we're all having fun making games. This would be our hobby if it wasn't what we also wanted to make money with, right? So we're all just making fun games, and I say share the value that you're creating. So,
hi Salim. First off,
hello. How's everybody doing?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm excited today.
You're quiet today for some reason.
Am I?
Yeah, you're really
just a
silent,
bit.
like you're not kissing your microphone. Yeah, it sounds like you have a Shure mic and it's not next to your mouth.
It's not a Shure mic. This is a Yeti.
Oh, you got a Yeti facing backwards.
Is this better?
Yeah,
Crank it.
slightly.
All right.
Could be better.
I turned it up a bit.
Okay. All right. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So on regarding selling your assets before you publish the game, as Andrew said, the reality is you need to be able to fund yourself. And contrary to most people think it's a Unity asset flip, is not a common enough statement because most people don't even go to the Unity asset store and see what's going on in there. It's a very small minority that will go, explore the entire store, recall what is in there, and then say, oh yeah, it's an asset flip. And even then, they might be able to go and look for it out of curiosity and see that you're actually the publisher of the same asset that you're using in your own game. So it's a really small subset, and this fear is not, in my own opinion, justified as a means to prevent yourself from trying to monetize yourself a bit more, to support yourself as you're developing something. Making games is hard. It's hard to benefit from making games in the current state of the industry. But there is also the fear of, well, I am publishing my assets. What's going to prevent somebody from using these assets better than me in order to make something? They only pay for it once, but they might get way more money, and they'll say that game is better than that other game, even though they look the same. My original game is a clone of that other game because it's the same assets. This is one slightly more justified fear. Um, that said, it's not necessarily going to happen. It's extremely rare that somebody's going to see your assets just before a game publishes. That is, they're going to use it, publish their own game, and then making that game way more popular using, again, the assets that you made for that kind of purpose. So really, just don't mind it that much, in my own opinion. Whew.
I think that makes sense.
It's-
In general, you
Risks.
guys are dead on.
Yeah,
It's
very much a risk management topic.
Yeah,
I'll be
I
honest,
mean-
like if you're making a game and try to make a career out of it, you're already in the risk business, right? Like let's be real. And so the idea is you have to, and this is, if anything, I think the opposite advice is more true. 99% of people who are in that game making phase are risk averse. They're going to be thinking, I'm just doing this for fun. They're not thinking about their own cost and time. They're not thinking about all the money they're spending on assets. They're not thinking about all of the, because one mistake people make is if I'm working on a game and I'm spending my time doing that, you are only counting it as, oh, well, it's just me spending my free time. But it's not only not the time that you're like, the time you're spending costs money. If you were to pay someone else to do what you're doing, you'd pay them at minimum wage. That's still start to take that up in your head. But here's the other thing. Not only are you not earning that money, you're not earning the money you would be earning in the other job you might be doing in the time you might be doing this instead. So conceptually speaking, you're both paying for yourself for free and you're not earning the money you would have been earning had you been working during that time period. So let's be real here. An hour spent working on a game is probably costing you about $20 or $30 conceptually, if you think about it from how much that time is being extrapolated across the stuff you're doing. So I would say for most people, realistically, you have to start treating it more like a business. You have to start thinking about the marketing. You have to start thinking about building a community. You have to start looking at the cost benefit of how much it costs you to put in versus stuff you'll get out. And you have to start finding ways to cut your costs and increase your income, because a lot of margins are quite slim for games. Some games, again, you might hit a good margin and everything goes great, but you have to bank with the assumption that you might break even at, probable, and then maybe you might do a lot worse than that and it's a loss. So realistically, if you're at a position where selling the assets is going to help you, like the chance of someone using them in a way that'll impact the launch of your game and the time period between then is kind of unlikely, right? Like whatever time you're spending on your game, unless you're releasing them a year early, like which you can't do because you don't have them yet because they're not made, it's probably not going to impact the release schedule of your game. So in my case, I would say go for it. Realistically, it doesn't. Yeah, if you can get more income, then it helps.
Also, something that I haven't seen happen, but is pretty interesting to think about, is that games that want to support modding heavily will often have to provide some example of how they did their assets in order for modders to be able to make something similar of quality. And while most games don't provide any assets at all, some will provide either example packs or some publicly available asset, or tools to get the assets out of the game. I haven't seen anybody sell the assets as a means of trying to help people mod the game that they're making, which is something interesting to think about. Just throwing it out there. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
Ask away.
So all the stuff you just described, Jason, if I'm going to like make a game and I'm just like wanting to make it just because I want to do it, like all the stuff you just described is something you should think about. Like making games sound like not fun. So at what point when you decide to make a game, do you think that you invest in that? Because there's definitely a point when you're doing it too late. But is that point when you decide, hey, I just want to make a game for fun, and then like there's a point where you're like, you know what, I think I can make some money from this. At that point, do you then start looking at all the stuff that you're talking about?
You made a really good distinction. I think it's 100%. I should have highlighted this. There's two reasons why you do anything, right? Well, three you could argue. One is because it's just fun. It's literally entertainment. You're watching a show or a movie or something. One of them is to learn something. It's just purely that you want to get better or whatever it is you're doing, practicing, drawing, or whatever. And the other one is to make money. And I think it entirely comes down to what your objective is. Like, I make a lot of GIFs of Unity projects that I have no intention of turning into a game, despite what some people in my community keeps telling me I should do. And this is purely because I'm doing it because I want to test a theory or learn something. And I got what I want out of that experience. I'm happy and I move on. And I am not treating myself like whipping myself on the back for not treating it like a business and being min-maxing that, because the objective I went in with was this is an educational project. And I think there's one through line for all of them. Whether you're doing it for entertainment, whether you're doing it for getting better, or whether you're doing it for a business, all of them have one thing in common, which is an objective. And if your objective is just, I kind of just want to chill out for 2 hours, perfectly valid. If your objective is, I would like to get better at it, perfectly valid too. And if it's to make money, so is that. So I don't care which one you end up with, but you have to have your objective in mind. And if you go in with the mindset of, oh, this will make money, but you treat it like the same project you would do it for fun, you're going to screw yourself. You're going to waste your time, your money, and it'll never get anywhere. Yeah. So I'm just saying, whoever's doing this, you have to be reasonable with yourself. If you keep lying to yourself in the back of your mind, going, oh, but don't worry, we'll eventually sell it, but you're treating it like a fun hobby that you and your friends are just messing around with, it'll never turn into that project, because that's hard. It's legitimately a hard thing to do. And some of it's not fun. And you have to lean into the not fun things of building the community and doing the marketing and whatever. And if that's something that you say in the back of your mind, in 2 years' time, we'll think of turning it into a business, then like you're lost at this stage. Yeah. You just don't know it yet, and you won't know it until that time comes. So you have to just know early on, is it a game jam for fun or not? I think the best way to solve it, though, if I was to like pick the ultimate strategy, it would be start by making a game jam or a small game. Have fun with it. And the minute a game is fun and you can like give it to somebody new and you can just see them like, oh, they get this. There's something here. That's when you completely reel back and go, this fun idea might be evolving into a project. And if it is evolving into a project, that's when you start going, who's on it? How many people? How long are we dedicating? How much resources do we have? Are we buying assets? If we are buying assets, we put them in a list. We count how much money we're spending on this, and we make sure that within 3 weeks or a month or 2 months, we have a playable demo of this plus new stuff. If that's good, we show it to these people. Maybe we get some funding or whatever. And you don't have to know all the answers. You just need to have some plan. This will be playable with a better art in 3 months. This will be something we can show to a publisher in 6 months. This is something that we will try to sell in early access in a year. Whatever it is, just know that strategy. Because if you don't, it's basically just you having fun and lying to yourself that one day it might be a business. Businesses don't happen magically. They are made and they take work. So that's all I was saying. But you're right. There's room for fun, but as long as you know it is and you're not lying to yourself.
I got you. So, yeah, it's okay to reassess the objective, but starting with one objective and not to cross the objective streams, just to kind of summarize it. But it is okay to get to a point where say, okay, now the objective is a business. We started with a passion, now it's a business. Gotcha.
Don't be afraid of having fun as you're doing other things, though. One thing I do a lot is making educational projects for myself, and I'm having a lot of fun with them because learning is fun, essentially. When you are getting successful results, when you're meeting the goals of your training. And don't be afraid of showing it off either. Both of these things are very crucial in order to getting a good mindset about it, because if you're showing people that you made a cool thing, usually you'll get some praise for it, and that helps reinforcing that, yay, I'm learning things, people are seeing that I'm learning things, I can keep doing this a bit more like that. Treating your ego is important to a degree. Don't inflate it. But also, don't be afraid of spending on learning. If you have a goal, it's fine to spend on that goal, even if it's not going to gain money back. What you're trying to get is skill when you're learning. So looking at how giants already did a job, going on their shoulders, as it were, is very, very useful in order to cutting down time spent. This is why we have courses. This is why we have assets that people can buy, because sometimes when you're trying to learn something, you might need a tool in the way of making what you want, but you don't want to stop and go make the tool. You want to make what you came for. So if I want to make a nice selection system, I don't want to draw outlines on characters, but I know that I want outlines to be shown. I can just get an outline system. If I want to be able to learn how to draw a character in a cel-shaded way, but I have no technique on doing that and there is no good resource online, I can buy a paid resource and study it. Those are valid things. And if you're cutting down time and you're getting down, you're getting the value that you looked out of, entirely valid. just wanted to say there are mixes here. You don't have to go 1, 2, or 3. You can go any mix of them.
And I definitely can't disagree on the learning and courses stuff, as I've been a member of Pluralsight for about 10 years. And great example, we talked about Obsidian earlier. I found that very late in terms of like people have been using this tool for years, and I've only found out about it recently. And within 24 hours, I'm like, this tool is now part of my life. This isn't just a random thing. I picked up other tools, and there was like within a week, it wasn't really for me. I knew there was something about it that was like, this is what I wanted. This is the app. I just need to learn how to use it. So since I started using it, I probably spent about $1,000 on courses in and around knowledge management, project management, all of this stuff in my how to use tools like Obsidian, PKM, linking thinking. There's a whole lot of series of courses around this topic because I came to the conclusion I want this. It's very important for what I do, and I'm willing to invest in doing that. And so education is something I'll always say is worth spending money on. There's no doubt about that.
Also, segueing a bit into studying about stuff. So I actually am trying to get one of the. Actually, can we talk about this earlier? The shader thing that we talked about earlier. Is that fine to bring up?
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Yeah. So I am recently investing a lot of time in learning VFX and shading, and I have been going down a really, really steep rabbit hole about trying to figure out all the nuances of why you're doing things the certain way you do them regarding rendering, because I have a very specific problem that I think nobody is ever going to help me on.
And by the way, and I'm like way lower down, but he was helping me with shaders too, because I'm currently like an absolute beginner when it comes to using shader stuff, and it was fun getting a bit of help doing some pretty basic stuff, but getting my own like shader stuff done. So yeah.
Yeah. So when I am trying to figure out something, I am basically poring over every available resource. I will buy assets, I will open them up, I will look at every single instruction in the shaders that are there, and I'm like, oh, they're doing it the way that I didn't look for. Oh, they're doing it nicely, but they can do it better. Oh, they can do that in a certain way. I'm not trying to be boasting about my skill here. It's just that people do whatever works, and it's not necessarily what you're looking for if you're trying to figure out ground truth. Computer art is essentially about cheating. So essentially, I was trying to make the perfect rendered stylized character, and this is incredibly difficult because there's a lot of small nuances in how you do it. And essentially, I decided I had enough. I'm not going to figure this out on my own. I need to see how others composite their way. So I figured out all the online tutorials that I can find. I got more than 10 assets of that on the asset store to pour over all the options. And now I am looking at Nilotune URP, which is an amazing shader that's being shown both on YouTube and has a GitHub repository with a lot of samples that you might want to open up and like scroll through. But yeah, so I am going to be trying and studying it soon. Hopefully it's going to be whatever I prayed it would be. But there's a lot of really small, interesting topics regarding shaders that are really worth talking about. So you can see the characters both in shader off mode and shader on mode, and there's a lot of things that people take like for granted when they're saying, "Oh, it's anime style." There is so much going on there. As a starter, you can see the character faces don't have as much shadowing. They stay lit under certain circumstances. There's also distortion of the perspective projection regarding the characters. There are outlines, and there's also Sobel edges to highlight certain portions of the characters. There's a certain glow to how things should and would look. It's a culmination of many, many features, and when people say something is pretty, they mostly mean this combination of features, and it's like really difficult to discern where something is and where something isn't worth tinkering with. So yeah, I just wanted to bring it up because I'm gushing over this effectively. Yeah. So
the shader looks way different. So how does this work? I mean, you've been playing with this a bit. Do they just you swap in the new shader and then do a bunch of setup, or is it just magic? Or
so I don't have it yet. First off, I am talking to the developer in an attempt to obtain this. But there are more steps than people think of here. It's not just a single shader that you put over a single character. There are multiple phases regarding post-processing as well that have to be taken. One thing that if you look at Unity's official Japan project, Unity-chan shader, is that the character is basically composited in a way that it has both unit rendering of its own, and it has passes for certain special post-processing effects like edge detection, which is something we talked about in Jason Story's Discord server earlier today. But basically, when you're drawing something on screen, there is going to be some amount of information that your character model has, but there is also an interaction that it has to have with the scene. And you don't necessarily have all the relevant scene information. So what you can do is, after the character is done rendering and the scene is done rendering, you can make a pass over both of them, figuring out where you want to tweak things and how you want to tweak them. But you need to keep all this information. And that comes into having buffers and special passes, and this is why we have stencil buffers. And to the person who mentioned Freya Holmer's videos, Aaron Carter, thank you. She is great about that. Everybody should go and watch Freya's entire series about this on YouTube.
And the editor tooling one as well. That's personally my favorite.
Yeah.
What was that? The which one, Jason?
Editor tooling, sort of learning how to use all of the editor draw tools and making your own rects and managing the undo tool and, customizing. There's a lot. Learning how to do editor stuff is a lot. And
Yeah.
She has some good ones on that. We're going to have to dive into editor tooling in a few minutes too, because there were some questions for you about that I haven't popped up yet. So continue on, Yorai. Tell us more about the shader.
Yeah, so I just want to bring up the Unity content shader too, because this is in English and there's a lot more detailed display of certain features in here. If you can open that link up. But yeah, there's a lot of things that people are trying to figure out in order to make something pretty. For example, when you're thinking about outlines for a character, there are so many techniques in order to do this in different ways. The most common one that you'll see in many lower end games is exploding character faces in 3D away from their original point along their vector, their normal direction. So if you have a cube and it has 6 faces, each face has a normal direction, the direction at which the face should be rendering, that is pointing directly away from the center of the cube outwards. And if you push it that way, you can basically explode the cube because the faces are not connected, so it's going to end up like disconnected. And that colored can look like an outline, but you're going to have this weird, annoying disconnect at the edges of the cube. Now, another technique you can do...
It looks like a broken line renderer, which is really frustrating.
Yeah, exactly. And another thing you can do is the reason those edges are actually disconnected, by the way, is because you're using sharp rendering. The way sharp rendering works is that each face is actually disconnected from the faces near it. So it's essentially 2 different objects that are rendering aligned perfectly. And also, this is why you get shadow seams in lower quality light renderers when you're trying to go over something. There's this shadow bias thing that says, well, there are 2 objects here, and I don't know exactly where I'm supposed to draw the shadow because I can kind of leak the light ray here because we don't have perfect 3D detection of the positions for everything. So this is why you can get like leaks of light between 2 sharp corners in an object in Unity. So what you can
plus
do...
Unity doesn't like stuff that doesn't have back faces too. I get into that problem all of the time with Pro Builder, where if you invert a mesh for the sake of making a boxed room, sometimes your light will go crazy because there's at the intersection point of 2 pieces of geometry where there's no back faces. It's so thin conceptually that line can actually leak light. So sometimes you have to literally take the environment, duplicate it, flip it inside out, and make a box large enough to hide the light rays.
Yeah, and another technique you can avoid that is actually welding the edges together. So you end up not having those disconnected edges, but you lose the ability to have a sharp rendering mesh. So now you have a smooth cube, but if you're going to explode it, the directions at which it explodes can actually look slightly better. You're also going to have to change the normal directions of each vertex exploded differently. And then we get into when you have that kind of explosion, it's not necessarily going to be the explosion that you look for, because if you have a character with a strand of hair that's going forward near its face, the hair is going to have outlines. And if you're exploding them all equally, the outlines for the hair are going to be gigantic and weirdly buggy and dark and uncool. So what you want to do is now introduce a concept of some outlines should be thinner than others. So now we're going into masking out how wide each outline should be. And that is basically just a texture for the outline mesh that you're creating and rendering. So that's one technique to go there. But some people decide, I don't want to deal with any of that. This is like crazy and annoying and stupid. Can I just get something that looks nice and clean and smooth and only does the outlines outside the character? Because I don't want the outlines near the head, on the nose, and whatever clothes I have to have all their own outlines. So there we get into, after the entire character renders, just give that character outline, which requires figuring out what is the character and what is not a character. That is in post-processing usually done, or by using stencil buffers to draw the character where the character should be, then comparing that compared to everything that's nearby, and then saying, if this is the character and the rest is not the character, we have an outline here. And this gets into blurring things and sampling multiple points on screen, and also why you have downsampling, because both copying the entire screen and figuring out where it is, or trying to sample too far away positions is extremely slow for the GPU. So when we downsample, we both lower the amount of vertices we have to, not vertices, pixels we have to copy, and also making searches faster, because there is some caching for nearby points on screen whenever you're sampling a point on a texture, which is going to be the screen. There we go. Fun stuff. Sorry.
No, it's
So
good.
yeah.
So you're gonna add? Are you going for this one, or you're heavily looking at that other shader, right?
So I've been looking at the Unity shader for years, and I have been studying it, and I freaking love it, and I have like 5 of my own versions of it, and I never use them for almost anything, because I end up always trying to use shader graph instead, because I like shader graphs and they're easy and fun to edit, compared to HLSL, which is always hell, and I always keep learning new things about it. But yeah, I'm going to try and use Nilotune, and hopefully I can get something that I'm happy with rendering wise. The developer has been very supportive, and every question I ask, I got the dream answer, which is basically making me super gush about it, because I'm like, come on, I want to play with this already. Yeah. It's just I have no words. Also, in regards to the characters you see on that, a lot of the games I play, the characters being shown here are from them. So I gush about Honkai Impact pretty regularly on Jason's server and any server. It's a bit of a problem. I'm addicted. Help. But basically, if characters can look as good as characters in Honkai, which admittedly has far simpler shading than what you see here, I'm going to be happy. And also, I suck at making art. So I also get models, just like some of those that you see here. Those are from another asset store, which is more oriented around VR chat as a whole, compared to asset store on Unity. That is called Booth PM, by the way. You can get some of the models that were there showcased for purchase. They're not cheap, but they're high quality models. So
Can you
it's
use them in
really
commercial things though, or is it like those other
most of
sites?
them you can. They actually
Oh,
have
okay.
their own licenses about how you can both get them, and some of them have permissions to give that to an artist to make you clothes, or allowing modifications to be sold, or you can make modifications and sell them separately. Regarding that, each asset has its own license, so be very mindful as you buy them, if you buy any. But it's really interesting, and I've been binging those stores, looking at all the different variations. Jason knows. It's a personal hobby to see how people make good-looking art. How much time has passed when I started ranting?
Oh, not very much.
If we're totaling up hours, man, you're not even close to my record, so you're fine.
Yeah, that was only about a minute. You're good.
That's been
You're
a
good.
long minute.
Yeah, I can listen to you rant anytime, man. It's always filled with knowledge and awesome stuff. So have fun.
So I wanted to pop up this question for Jason real quick, but first, just want to remind everybody who hasn't entered the giveaway, we're giving away just a copy of JetBrains Rider. All you have to do to enter is choose a race and class. They're all kind of right here in the list, except I don't. Oh, somebody even picked Worm. So the races actually matter a lot more than the classes today. I nerfed the classes down to be almost no stats and just left the races where they are. So there'd be more experimenting there. So we'll see how it goes. I have no idea which one's good. I know there are a lot of dragons that get 15 health per win and 1 attack damage per win. I'm not going to give everybody else the stats, but that's what the dragons get. So you see what the other ones do as people play in battle, and the winner will get a free copy of JetBrains Rider, and I think we'll also we'll throw in a copy of or a ticket for the GameDev Guild Pro Pass. So if you want to check that out, there's a link down below for GameDevGuild.com. And it's an online conference we're doing next. That's it. Oh, it's in a week and a half about. So Tuesday the 24th through the 26th. Online 3-day event. Your Eye is going to be there. Jason's going to be there. Hopefully Salim will be there. We'll see. But there will be a lot of people there. It should be a lot of fun and lots of interesting stuff to learn. And we're also going to have, last week we had a little pre-mixer on Thursday. And because it was so much fun and like a dozen people asked me to do another one. We're just going to do another one on Sunday. So I think I'm going to just do it Sunday after the show. We'll just hop on for an hour, hop in together, say hi to people, chat, run around. The same old stuff. Have some conversations and stuff totally open. And we'll probably have some sponsors in there doing some giveaways, giving away whatever random things that they've got and want to do. Also, later on in the month, next month, I want to start doing just some open meetups for everybody, not just GameDev Guild attendees. So we can have like maybe a monthly Unity meetup where people can hop in and do little lightning talks, get together, meet some people, talk about jobs, talk about other tech and opportunities and stuff. So I think it'd be a lot of fun. If you're interested in that, check out the link down below. But if you want to win, just choose a race and class, and you'll be added in and kind of pop into this big list and pile of people for the battle in just a few. All right, where was my question for Jason? There it is. It was this one right here. How do you make forms in Unity that show your character stats when you press a button to make a form appear? And I wanted to pop this one up because there were like 6 different questions about custom editor stuff. And I thought this was kind of like a good start of them. And it was the first one. So you guys...
I will say, if we're talking stats in the editor, I mean, I'm not your man here. That's our good friend Andrew here. He's the one with the stats in the editor who's got an entire system around this. So he's the one to talk to.
I do, but I'm not sure what form means here.
Just in game, you want to open a UI that shows character stats.
Oh.
How do?
Well, I mean, you just turn the game object on, I suppose, but it really is the question about populating it, and all that. In which case, you need. Is it a question about a stats system, or is it a UI question?
I was thinking, so maybe I misread it too, but I was thinking in the context of editing all of these character stats and setting them up with the forms to actually edit them. Because I guess when I saw form, I assume input. So I was thinking like the forms to actually set up character stats for different characters,
like character creation, etc.
Yeah, and there were other questions about making custom editors and custom dialogue editors, custom character editors, and I really just kind of wanted to bring up the whole point in the discussion about where you guys go with those. Like, where do you start building your own custom editors? Where do you just use some built-in stuff? Do you just take some external tools? Do you throw all the shit into JSON data or CSVs or?
Yeah, that's more of a question I can sink my teeth into because I kind of get where you're going now with this.
That's what was in my head, maybe not in the words or the original intent of the question.
I think then I guess it's probably, if it said my brand, I guess, is I'm just not interested in giving like direct code answery questions, because like you can Google stuff. If the answer is how do you do X, just type it into Google. Someone will tell you.
You don't know what you don't know, though.
True. I will say, for me personally, the most valuable stuff to learn is how to solve problems and how to approach problem solving. And so the answer to this question, to me at least, isn't really how do you use editor tooling and when do you use them. It's more, when do you know when you should use them and how do you get to that stage. And I guess what I mean by that is, it's editor tooling is fun. I've said this before. And so it's a dangerous precedent to set, that as somebody, like if you're into programming, you like tinkering with logical problem solving stuff. And if you like doing that and you're making a game, the idea of making cool editor extension stuff for your game is inherently a fun concept. You're going to enjoy doing it. But it's very easy to fall into the trap of having more fun making your tools than making your game, or using your tools even. And so I would say, as a general philosophy of design, this goes for every aspect of programming. When should I refactor? When should I add more things? When should I add more features? When should I test new game mechanics? Every single time, the answer is always the same. It's when you should, and as quickly as you can within the context of what you're doing. And so what I mean by that is, if the answer is, do I start with the dialogue system? Well, no. If I need dialogue in my game, I would make an array, I'd put some text in it, and I would test that two characters can say hello and then hello back. If that works, I will keep working on stuff. And if I now need more complexity than that, I don't want to keep messing with the array indexes on this bloody list and changing objects. So I make a text file and I write them with the text file and I say, okay, I'll just read them in from the text file. That'll do for now. And then I'll keep going and I'll get as far as I can reasonably with that solution. And at some point it's like, oh, my friend is a writer and he's way better at this than I am. I want him to like take a look over the dialogue. I don't want him to install Unity and go through all the process. What if we take it out one step further, put it in some sort of like Google Sheets doc or something, or probably an Excel sheet with different cells, and I'd say, you know what, you do the writing for me, let me know, and then I'll pull the file down. And then it's like, okay, that's great, but now I have to save the file every time he's making changes, and he's making changes every couple of days. What if I build a thing where I can press a button in the editor and it'll just pull down the latest version of the Excel document? And so in each case, it's about solving a problem iteratively as you go. So when it comes to the editor tool in question, the answer is, if you try to make an editor tool, that's what you'll make. You'll have fun making an editor tool. If you try to make a game, you'll make a game. And if you try to do halfway between the two, you'll end up with pretty much nothing. And so as somebody who makes projects for clients, my main solution is I have a big discussion with the client. I find out what it is that they want, and I will make the thing that solves their problem. And then once it's solved the problem, they'll come back to me and tell me what they need to change. And this is another one that I've seen a million times from people who do contract work and are kind of new to it. They'll try to deliver the best product in the world. The client will say, we need a button that says ta-da. That's what we need, a ta-da sounding button. And they'll go away and make a button system factory which generates custom meshes and renders stuff, and they'll deliver it to the client and say, look at all these cool features I gave you. It's like, okay, does it do the button thing? It does, look, there you go. And it's like, okay, we want to change the word now to hooray. It's, okay, it'll take a few weeks. It's like, why? Like, you've made a whole thing that's made everything more complicated and doesn't actually solve the technical problems they have. If you make the thing they want, come back, and then they ask for changes, you can say, oh, okay, I've learned a valuable lesson. The ability to change what it says is a requirement. Now I have the prerequisite knowledge that the next iteration of the system has a modular word picker, because I have a strong sense the word might change third time around. So you're able to make changes that the architecture will directly reflect the things that are going to happen. And so with editor tooling, I will make editor tools for things that are either wasting my time or annoying me, but I won't make them otherwise. And so 90% of the time, I start with very simple, and I'll slowly build it up until you have automated preprocessors. If I'm dropping in a couple of textures into my project, I won't bother automating it. If I've got 100 items in textures and I'm going to swap them for a whole new item set when the client comes along with new ones, I'll put an item preprocessor in there so I can drop it all in one folder, have all of the switches set to the right thing, and have it rehook itself up, because I'm not doing that myself. And if this changes the third time, I don't want to have to do it a third time. So in general, it comes down to reason out logically when it's worth doing. I know it's not a very satisfying answer, but the truth is it's degrees, and you get better at knowing where the degrees are the more you do it, and you won't until you do it first. So I always say this: hit the problem first. That's number one rule. Do something the way you know how to do it, and don't try to be too smart for your own good. Hit the wall. And when you hit the wall, step back and go, oh, okay, I don't want to hit that wall again. How do I make sure next time I don't have to hit that wall? And if you keep iterating that way, everything will always have progress that works in the direction you're aiming for.
Yeah. So, Jason, Go ahead.
Salim's
I was
muted.
saying, would you basically say like necessity determines priority and effort when you're going through stuff? Like I don't need a dialogue tree until I actually need one, and then how much of that do I need? So just letting your pace determine when you need things to come online instead of just randomly choosing something you just want to work on and then find out you're wasting a bunch of time.
Especially because things change. I think we can all agree, right? Like, I love this example because it's so stupid. The first Halo game was called, I think it's like Monkey Punch or something, and it was a top-down RTS. And so think of how many decisions have changed over the lifetime of that game to end up with the one that we know, right? And it didn't even do it incrementally. It wasn't even like a whole big game change. It started like that. Then it moved to they made a car because the car was cool, but then clicking around and moving the car wasn't fun. So people started driving the car, and driving the car was fun, but they didn't like the camera angle, so they moved the camera down, so it's in first person now. Drive the car. That was cool, but now the character can't do anything after you drive around, so they had to go. Literally, the game that you know as Halo, it didn't like come fully formed out of someone's brain. It was like they actively said, "We made Marathon. We don't want to make another game like that." They started a completely different direction, and it sort of flowed back in that direction because they found it fun. And so if you make your game with a million assumptions, you are screwing yourself because half of that stuff will get thrown out and you'll waste your time and you're like, I think it was Chris Lucian, friend of Jason's and mine, who said, I love this quote. It's such a good quote. He basically said, if a programmer knows how long something will take, they'll automate it. If they know a problem so well that they're going to hit the problem, they'll just find a way not to do the problem. So in truth, a lot of the systems you design in programming, you don't know yet. If I knew what the correct thing to do for a weapon system was, I would just make the perfect thing, because if I knew it, I would just make it. The answer is I probably don't. I have a rough idea, and so I'll make a rough idea. I'll battle test it by having people play it. If they don't like certain areas, I'll keep iterating and fixing it. So 100%, it's all about requirements. And I think it's not just about you personally. I think this is the biggest bit of advice you can ever give to anybody who makes client work. I have friends who build websites. I have friends who were logo artists. I have people I know who, write stories for other people, a lot of different jobs. And I say the same thing to all of them, which is if you go away and make a thing and bring it back and they don't like it, like all of that extra effort you put in and stuff that wasn't agreed upon or discussed, that's wasting your time, their time, no one's happy. If you go as far as you're comfortable with, step one, make sure you get the requirements right, talk to your client, understand what they actually want, make it as good as you can, deliver to them, and have a dialogue. And that's where the whole philosophy of agile development came along. It's small steps means you're never going to go too far off the wrong path. If I keep taking steps in this direction and I'm wrong, I have to go all the way back to go in the right direction. If I take small steps and I course correct, I'll never actually go too far wrong,
Yeah. So there was this one statement that, Jason, thank you for bringing it up. Somebody, Dylan Bram says that it makes sense to design and build core components ahead of time, right? And I kind of want to contest that, because when you're deciding what is a core component, people will have to say, my initial vision for a project says that I need all of the stuff. And when I need all of the stuff, I'll decide they're all core components. I'm not going to get rid of all of the stuff because this is what I want to make. So you'll end up over engineering, which, by the way, is the term that I'm going to get into here. All of the available things that you wished you have before you're even ready to use them or determining if they're good for you or not. When you have a project, start small and adjust along the way. Also, as Jason mentioned, do not do more than there was agreed upon. If you have big ideas, don't just do them. Communicate to them, to the person who's actually going to consume them, and they're going to tell you if that's actually something they want or not. And try to work in small deliverables, because even if you have all the ideas and all of your core is going to end up being used at one point, it's not going to be used at once. People can only work on one thing at a time, usually. So you can work on one system, let other people consume it as you work on another system, and other people can consume that, and you can get iterations from the first people. This is going to impact the way that you work quite a lot. You cannot just work on one unusable system in isolation to infinity, then finish it off, then give it to people and see all of the changes that they're asking for, and repeat this cycle. This is going to be vicious, cruel, and everybody's going to feel unhappy because they're going to have a long waiting time and anticipation, and you're building it in their dream, the dream system that they're going to use forever, and they're not going to need anything else. and you are going to end up with an anxiety of outrageous amounts where you don't know if it's actually going to stand up to the wishes that you've been making them build up the entire time. It's really not worth figuring out what you have to design ahead of time. Make small deliverables that people can immediately start telling you how to improve. That's going to be way better for everybody.
But
Out of experience.
but this question applies. The statement here applies to kind of what you're saying, though, right? If you have a big idea for a game and then you cut that up into little pieces, each individual piece you are then going to design and build the core components for that piece and then make a deliverable, right? So I'm curious if the question is like asking broadly for an entire project, or if it's just saying as a general course of action. When you identify what you're doing, this small piece is going to be these core pillars for this small deliverable. So I'm going to design and build these.
The underline here is core components and not core component. You can build one unit of work and deliver that instead of saying, we are going to make an action RPG with dialogue and everything. You don't have to make the dialogue, the combat, the camera movement, the whatever have you, input mapping and localization, all of that ahead of time. You can say, we have a localization system now, so you can already start deciding on some stupid stuff for the character to say. You can say, it's not going to be pretty yet, but I have the text printing on the screen if you put it there. And then, okay, they can write text, but now it's not very easy to input it. They want to be able to see a list of everything that is there. So you already have an iteration step that you can go for later. At the same time, you can be working on basic character input and a camera system that just follows the character. So you can say, here's a character that can walk. You can run around with it and design a level with this, because now you can know how far a character can move, etc., etc. So people can start building their levels, and they're saying, yeah, well, this is working well, but now we want this long level where the camera should be stuck to the side and not be free of player control, like one of those near levels. So now you already have an iteration step of that. And while you're working on other things, you're letting everybody continue working without waiting on you. They already know what they want, and you're not building God systems, which is one massive pain in the butt of every engineer, because you want to make God systems. It's inherently appealing to make I'll make the best system everybody has ever used. And Jason's story will happily tell you that you can make a God system that now you're afraid to use because you don't know what's in there anymore.
So would you say, if we take that question and we break it into the two parts of design and build, would you say the design portion, ideation portion of just like sitting down and just designing in your head or writing down like a bunch of different parts of a game and how they would interlink with each other, would you say that that is also kind of a waste? Because you're at that point, there is no concept of what my small deliverable would be, because at the ideation portion, that's when you're kind of determining what those are. So I think the question saying design and build, like you can actually just design in kind of a high level and say, this is what this is. And then from that, with calling your smaller pieces. And then from that, you would decide what are actual or base core components for each individual piece. Right. And then say, okay, well, now let's I think ultimately you could do that if you are disciplined enough to understand the kind of lower level application of that concept, instead of it being a broad thing, which I do think the question is just asking broadly. And that's obviously not, that's just silly, because you're going to end up, like I said, designing way off over the cliff. But I do think that if you are metered and you understand what you're doing, the ideation portion is what's going to determine for sure, like this is what our game is. Here is how we can actually break it down, these components. And now let's actually be smart about these deliverables. This is, we're going to deliver localization, we're going to deliver this, and the other, and then break those down further. I think you can apply it in a way that's smart. So I wouldn't necessarily say the question is bad overall. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a bad idea. I just think it's the way that you apply the concept at a high level. The concept seems like it makes sense. But it can definitely put you in a situation where you're just making some really horrible decisions on the project if you don't think about it smart.
And to be fair, a lot of this comes down to experience, because when you start off, you have all those big ambitions, but you don't necessarily know what you're going to need and how this is going to play out. And as you do that and you stumble upon successes and mistakes, you know more of what you'll actually need and what you actually want, so you can convey that to others. But the main thing here is to not assume by yourself.
Oh yeah.
If you're working with a team, make sure that everybody is aware and everybody's who is capable has a hand in making the decisions necessary.
I think there's some considerations though that just to be contrarian a bit here, there's perspective matters, and I think working with a team, yes, but if a lot of these people listening might be working by themselves, and the question that was on the screen recently, if you're making a dialogue driven game, shouldn't you build a dialogue system? And the answer might be yes. I think the pitfalls that exist are real. And in Jason's story, you brought up the Halo example. And I think this is an important thing to remember. If you're building a game, your game might not be what you think it is. The final product might be very different than what you start, if that's the path you're taking. However, a lot of people are building a very specific game, and they're not coming at this from the position of I might change this game. They're coming out from a position like, I know this is something I want in my game, and if I don't have this in my game, I'm going to abandon it. I'm going to move on to the next game, the next thing I'm going to do. And in those situations, I do think there is some value in building a system when and again, this is a pitfall area. You could be wrong, but if you know that you're going to build a dialogue game and you know that there's a complexity about it that requires some advanced system, because otherwise it's going to take way too long to do things manually or going to get too confusing with spaghetti or whatever, maybe it makes sense to build a system. But you might be wrong.
I want to go too.
I've got so much on this, so you guys go ahead. There's so much to say here.
I'm calling dibs. I agree with you that if you want something for the soul, it's more important to actually chase it. But, and this is the big but here, you start with small deliverables, because the people who are going to be making this dialogue system are also the people who know best how to convert things to newer versions. And this is something that we do a lot as programmers. We can start with the small and simple, make a better system, and convert to it. But if we start with the big system, we're going to invest a lot of time that's not necessarily what we want. If we know we want it, we can let people start working immediately. And as we improve the workflow, we can make a one-time conversion to the better version.
Yeah,
which is
fair, that still implies that you're working with other people. If you're working by yourself, then you're the one doing everything.
Yeah, but if you're working by yourself, you're deciding how much value you're getting out of it. The original question was asking if you feel it's worth or not worth. So how much time are you saving yourself? Do you decide if it's worth for you to invest in making a better system or not? Why?
Oh, okay, so I'm going to just go on a huge rant here, guys. So just everyone buckle up, right?
I'll pour some coffee.
Cheers.
Right. So my first part of this is to say,
small Jason.
Everyone here is talking about this topic as if it's a game design problem or a game development problem. There is nothing about what we're discussing which has anything to do with video games. As it might be a surprise to anybody, but if you're talking about how do you make a certain picture look good in your game, you're actually not talking about pictures, you're talking about art. If you're talking about how do I make a certain scene look good, you're actually not talking about video games, you're talking about composition. So as is no surprise, a lot of these fields, somebody else somewhere is doing it for a living. And so what you guys are discussing in vivid detail is a topic called project management. It is a completely unrelated to video game in every single way field. And there is a lot of stuff in there about this exact situation, how you should do it, how you should address the problem. And so the first thing I want to say, just in case Andrew thinks I'm about to jump down his throat, you are 150% correct in what you said. But there is a definition for that, and it's part of the process that I'm describing. So I'm going to highlight this, which should hopefully clarify what I'm saying. You can pull that up, Jason, just for 1 second.
1 second, no more. One is enough.
Yeah. So this is literally what you were describing. This is this concept of when you start a project, there are things you know, things you don't know, things you know that you don't know, and so on. And so the idea is here that in your example, some things that you know are that you're going to make a certain kind of game. That's your starting point. Some things you don't know is the mechanics fun? Or is this system that we're going to integrate with going to work? Or do we need to learn how this API works? So there is something in project planning called known unknowns. And those known unknowns are the very things you're describing. Do I have to put together some proof of concept to say, is this the right system for what we're doing? And that is entirely valid in the process of making a project. It's extremely important before you go down and invest too much time and resources that you know your known unknowns and you've done a test. And in a more specific granular level, if you're a programmer on a project, the name for these are spike tasks. There is some task blocking what I'm trying to do. I don't know how to do it, how to use this API, how to integrate this system. And so you make a task where the task is learn how to actually do the real task. And that's a task you have to assign and treat like a real task. Like some people don't, and they kind of get frustrated because they spend a week meandering trying to figure out some collisions on a character controller. Well, make a task which says learn how grounding on character controllers works. 2, apply said learning to my own character controller and treat that as part of your planning process. So that's 100% right, and it's accounted for in a good project planning system. But after that, I completely disagree because we're talking about something else. And that's where Salim 100% nailed it with the keyword that was being used. We're going to bring up a second reference here called smart. So Salim was using the word smart constantly, and this is so prevalent in project management that it's actually an acronym. It's a very, very specific, targeted and known acronym for this exact scenario we're talking about. And this is smart project planning. And you'll see here, it's the idea of what I was getting at. So it doesn't matter whether you're making a game, building a nuclear power plant, or trying to write a story, or start a D&D group with your friends, no matter what it is, if it is a project, and by the way, if you read the book I have over there, Getting Things Done, David Allen, he defines a project as anything with just one or more actions to be done on it. So a project is literally anything. It could be going for a walk. It doesn't matter what it is. If there's an action to be done and it's not done, that is a project. And so this is how you do a project. And it's surprisingly simple once you lay it out like this. A project needs to be specific. If you don't know when it's done, you can't know that you're finished. And that's the first thing we were describing. You need to have a deadline or a goal or something. If it's a proof of concept or a white box room, the specificness of the goal is we are done when I can run around this room, collect 5 coins, and exit through the door. That's my prototype. I know this first phase is done when that happens. That's where the measurable bit comes in too. So specific is we're making a prototype demo, and we have to be able to measure when we're done. If I can't collect 5 coins, exit through the door, it may be specific. I know I'm making a shooter game, and it's going to be in Unity, and it's going to use this technology. But if I can't measure that I'm done, I can't ever prove I'm done. So specific, measurable, attainable should be pretty obvious. Don't try to make an MMO for your first game. I keep saying this. You won't do it, and you'll hate yourself if you fail. Start with something small. I'm not saying never make an MMO. I'm saying make an attainable goal, something you can actually achieve. Relevant comes more into business, and that comes down to the fact that if you do make a game and you'll have no audience for it, it's not worth doing. A project, whatever it is you're doing, should be relevant to what your objectives are. And this is actually a surprisingly complicated one because a lot of people will do a project and only afterwards ask themselves if they should have done the project. And this comes down to a small degree, maybe your project is your inventory system or your stats system. And the relevancy might be, do I really need to spend 2 weeks making a fancier visual editor? Or is there something more important I should be spending my time on, like adding this feature that we're actually going to use in the game? Should I add animations to my editor, or is it better off if I actually do the saving? Because it doesn't save yet and it needs to save. So relevancy is important to your project. And finally, time-based, and that just is to tie in with the measurable, is that if you don't put a timestamp on it, there's another great quote, which says a project will expand to fill the time allotted. So if you give a project 2 months, it'll take 2 months. And we've all done this. We've all been in school or college where we've given it 2 weeks to do an essay and we do nothing. And then we magically get it done a day or two before it needs to be done. But if you were given 4 days to do an essay, I bet you'd have it done in 4 days, right? So the project will grow to fill the time you give it to do. So this is why following a smart approach to doing a project means you should keep small, agile, cyclical processes and then be able to measure and achieve those goals. And using this combined with that idea of known unknowns means from a project management perspective, you can make sure that your project's going to work, you have a lot of the correct funding, and you can actually achieve it. So it's a lot in it. So my point is, I agree, but a lot of these conversations come down to this idea that it's like some unique thing, like, oh, how do you solve this problem if you're a gamer, or how do you make a project if you're making your first? Like, none of this is new. If you want to learn how to manage time, read books on time management. If you want to learn how to manage a project, read books on project management. These are entire fields of study where very smart people have written very complicated books on it, and we don't need to guess. And it's not about personal feelings on it. There is research. There's lots and lots of research you can learn on the subject. So, rant over.
Just to add on that, You people are smart, so you can abstract things. Don't just decide that it's not a project if it's a dialogue system. Everything applies. That's the thing.
I mean, for me, like a lot of this stuff, which I've experienced it or been talked to about it, just going through in the industry. But ultimately, a lot of stuff just comes down to common sense to me. Like it just feels like just kind of a simple thing to kind of you know absorb, just to experience, because you go on that tear about all these things, and every time you say something to me, my brain just goes, yeah, like that's just how it should work. Like it doesn't seem, it shouldn't seem foreign to anyone. But I think when you're in that situation, certainly for the first time, like things that are that simple seem like they shouldn't be that simple. So you kind of overthink it and you want to make things complex because making a game should just be hard or difficult or crazy. Like it has to be this big and elaborate. It just that's just what I think it should be. But it really doesn't have to be. Like if you just cut it into little pieces and you know, like you said, don't make an MMO for your first game. Make something small. If you think about it, you could make something small, and that small can then become a component of the MMO you eventually make, or the second game that you make, and it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Yeah, it just like a lot of stuff just definitely seems like common sense to me. But you said something, and I was curious. You said people don't ask the question, "Should I do this project?" But I'm curious if you think there's a difference between the question, "Should I do this project?" and "Is it worth it to do this project?" Do you think those two are distinct differences, questions, or are they the same question?
There is a difference, but this kind of gets into a whole different area, which is if if you are spending money on a project, there's a need for you to do some research and know who your target audience is. And to me, that's a much bigger thing.
And
And I think
remember, worth can be anything. Worth doesn't necessarily have to be monetary. It's just value to you as a part of the question. When you think about it like that, do you think it's two different questions?
it's a good question. I don't know. Like it might be because there's a lot in it. I admit it's an interesting
It's loaded.
conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm approaching it specifically because, like I said, I don't think people need to be told to do a thing they're having fun doing. I think in general, the people out there who are making a game and having fun making a game don't need to be convinced that making a game is a good idea or fun.
And it's always
I think
worth it. Yeah.
it's the people who are in the other end of the spectrum who are asking themselves, should I do it? Or more importantly, from my perspective, not asking themselves if they shouldn't do it because they're putting a lot of assumptions on the success of a project. That I think that's the more valuable sort of
Gotcha.
question on that side. Yeah, it is tough. It's tough. Yeah.
There is a topic I
I
wanted
couldn't
to
answer
touch on
either.
though, Salim.
Yeah.
You mentioned that it's common sense for people to make decisions that seem right.
Yeah.
But I want to argue that a lot of people, when they're passionate about something or when they've been in it for quite a while, will have this effect where they stop considering the common sense or are
Yeah.
not thinking within the domain of it anymore, especially when working alone. Because you can go into a tunnel and decide, well, I need this, and for this, I need another thing, and for that, another thing, I need this. And then you're thinking 5 steps deep into the system, and the common sense only applies 3 steps back. So they're getting a bit removed from what seems like common sense.
Yeah.
And this is where I think there is a lot of value to gain from not thinking about those things alone.
Yeah. I do think
I
there's a concept of nurture versus nature when it comes to, like, for me being in the industry for a long time. Like I have picked up habits that I know are bad. And then I've gone somewhere else and I realize, and I've seen it, a counter habit that is good. And I've had to step back and assess and say, okay, the things that I've like are ingrained in me, I now have to teach myself differently, or I have to evolve them based on an example of something that's good. But before that, I didn't have an example that was good. And then in the back of my head, common sense is screaming, dude, like this is like not a good thing to do. But where I was before, stuff got done. So it seems like I get to your point, like I can get into a situation where I'm just kind of doing rote behavior when it comes to like doing a design process or whatever, and I go a new place and like it's counter to that. It just feels weird, and I make bad decisions, and I have to learn from those. But definitely, a lot of stuff to me is common sense. To just be more clear, like to me, it's common sense. And that's mostly from experience. But yes, initially people will definitely overthink and over design and over
It's
implement all kinds of stuff because it just seems like it's too simple to do the right, like this very simple thing, and that would make sense. It's too simple. It
I
can't be that easy.
I'd go even further, right? And I think that this there was something I read once that completely changed my perspective on that phrase, common sense. And I think what's really interesting to me is we all have an intuitive sense of what common sense is, and certain things seem weird or out of character or whatever. Like a great example to me is if you find out somebody's agoraphobic, and so that's somebody who stays inside, afraid to go outside.
Yeah.
You might go, that's nonsensical, right? There's no reason for you to be afraid of the concept of outside. But let's reframe that a little bit. That doesn't just happen. It's not abracadabra, they wake up and they're afraid of the outside. Something must have happened. Usually it's a trauma response. It's something has occurred that's made them afraid of the outside. And if you take a step back and go, hang on a second, is that a fault, or is it actually a logical decision? And from a scenario where our lives are entirely bombarded with events, and you go outside, something bad happens, your brain goes, bad stuff's outside. If you don't go outside, there's no bad stuff. That is legitimately a logical and common sense response. Is the outcome sensible? Probably not. But I think we put a lot of weight on that idea of common sense when realistically, you can come to nonsensical conclusions from sensible outcomes or from sensible decisions. And I think a great example of this is if you're working on a game, you might want to make the best system possible. And it's a perfectly logical and reasonable statement to say, I want to put the most amount of effort to make the best version of this thing I can. And that's not at all a bad decision. But in the context of the goal of making a project, wasting all of your time making one great system that's got nothing to do with your actual goal is a problem. And that's where it's not about common sense on a small scale, it's about common sense on a large scale. And I think that's where things are different, is that you have to put on different hats. And this is why I banged my drum earlier about the idea of treating your game like a business, because I think the biggest problem is that it is very easy. I was this guy. I was the programmer, sat at my desk, who tried to make the best software I could. And to me, the rest of the world is at war with me. The business who want me to do it faster, they don't understand. They're trying to stop me making the best possible thing. The clients using it and finding bugs, they're at war with me. They're trying to break my application that's really good. And it takes such a strength of will and time and experience to see that, wait a minute, my little bubble, it may be logical that I want to be the best at this one thing, but that's not the job. The job is somebody somewhere is paying money for a product to exist. And my job is to make that product, and therefore, way downstream is the quality of the fancy code I'm writing. And in the same breath, that's why I'm saying if you're making a game for fun, you can have that more I'm a programmer, make the best version mindset. If you are making a product, you have to step all the way out of your own head and go, how much money will people pay for this? If I'm paying money out of my pockets for time spent on this, how much is that worth? And then you have to critically evaluate your time faffing around and going, would I pay someone to do this? No, I would get angry at them if I asked them to do this and they spent 3 weeks doing this instead. And so it's entirely about that spectrum of common sense is great if your perspective is the same. And it's the classic, the wise men and the elephant. If you put 5 blind wise men and they're all at an elephant, one guy will reach out to the trunk and go, oh, it's like a rope. And one guy reach out to the side and go, oh, it's like a wall. And one guy reaches the tail and go, oh yeah, it's like completely different. Perspective is entirely what matters here. You could be the most logical, reasonable person in the world, but if your perspective is exclusively buried in the middle of your code, writing the best possible if statement you can, you will completely forget that over here, there's money, there's time, there's market, there's audience, there's whether the game is going to be good or not. And so that's what I really implore people, that if my career has taught me anything, it's that I've had to meet with people who are in the UX department, the UI department, the project managers, the product owners, the people who are funding things, it gives you such a perspective that you keep thinking your world is this one, but you're part of this project. The amount of times I've had to change what I was doing because I talked to the auditing department and they need certain information. And if that information's not in the system, then the project doesn't get made. Because if the project doesn't conform to the legal specifications required, it doesn't matter how pretty the code is. So if your boss tells you, stop working on that, we need to write this system that tracks some logs for some authentication stuff, that's not putting you off. That is helping this project to get made. Because if that's not done, nothing else happens. And so, step all the way back and go, it is not illogical to have a certain perspective that's your project and working on your game. It is, though, if you are trying to make a product, you have to step all the way back and see the product. And it's not easy to do, it takes experience, but believe me, you will fail if you keep looking down here and miss the forest for the trees.
And to add a bit more to common sense stuff, because I just want to say, this was perfectly spoken. There is one thing that is unavoidable, though, and it is When first off, hi Dave. You look great.
What?
So when you are talking about making common sense, there is one issue that is unavoidable, and it is your typos. Not necessarily the literal ones, but the ones that you acquire as you keep working on something and mentally filter it out as a solved problem. Something that happens quite a lot, regardless of what you're working on, what you're making, and what you're thinking you're doing, is that as you accumulate a version in your head that is the correct vision of how something looks, you might not notice small mistakes in it. Something that's very difficult for people to figure out is their own typos. When you're making a written work, you can decide that you're going to proofread and make sure that everything looks right, and then you're still going to miss that you included like 3 wrong words because there's no tool that points at it. And as you read the sentence in your own mind, it's going to sound entirely accurate because you know what word is about to arrive. And this applies to art as well. I've seen artists that draw characters with 3 hands because they decided at one point to shift one hand to the other position. In their mind, it has 2 hands. But as soon as you tell them that there's a third hand in art, they're going to go insane and not realize how they haven't seen it, even though it's been on screen for more than 20 hours. And if they're working in a team, it might apply to the entire team as well. It's ludicrous how it happens in the movie industry. Yeah, we can hear you. So this is why outside perspective matters and how your common sense matters a lot. Why are you laughing?
I'm just having mic problems.
Poor Dave just freaked out there.
What?
And then Jason mutes me, and I'm because I'm having mic problems, and then I fix them, and then I start going test, and then suddenly realise he's unmuted me.
Yeah, I unmuted you as soon as you stopped making weird noises.
I apologise profusely. Your eye, carry on.
My apologies.
No, it's all good. I was just finishing, but I'm saying that common sense is difficult to gauge because you filter out the problems and make your own version of common sense as you go.
Yeah, and yeah, I guess that's true because your common sense is also kind of instincts, and if you've been, once again, it's nurture versus nature. If you've been taught a certain way your entire career, that becomes your instinct, and to you, that can basically kind of muddy what common sense might be, or what people universally might consider common sense. But I do want to nominate, something Jason said for game title of the week. Outside is the bad stuff. Sounds like a perfect game name. Now the question is, a challenge for the audience is to tell me what kind of game that would actually be. But outside is the bad stuff. I love it. If I saw that, I would instantly click on a link and be like, what is this game about?
That is a pretty good name. Yeah,
a VR psychological mystery.
Like a panic room or like an escape room game or something. Yeah, that'd be pretty crazy.
It's already trademarked though.
Oh, what is it? What?
Yeah, I'm doing it right now.
It was like
I will say though, to put a bow on that general topic is that's why on a personal level I don't rely on this idea of common sense because again, exactly as Yora said, your relationship to sense is entirely driven by contextual information. I think if you think that's in doubt, think of any time you've sat down on your project and one day hated it and another day loved it. And we've all had that, right? You've all had some day where things are going well and you love your project. Other days you think it's the worst waste of your time ever. And that broken machinery that's giving you weird readings on different days shouldn't be the thing making the decision making. There should be something, you should have some barometer outside of yourself that you can compare against. And so in my mind, to me, that's the research of other people. And that's why frequently I bring up stuff related to architecture or to do with color theory or to do with whatever, because to me, like, I can assume the right way to do something, but like I said, there's usually a name for it. If I want to know how to make an environment look good, well, then I go to the field of study to do with environments and I look at architecture. If I want to learn how to make a good story, I read a book on writing stories, not games, on stories. And I then later on can apply one to the other because other fields will study this. And so I don't rely on my intuitive sense of right or wrong or true or false because I don't trust myself. I trust that I have enough wisdom to interpret information in a way that's useful to me, but I can't trust that my assumptions are correct. And so I will try to consume as much as I can, cross-reference what makes sense, and then retain the stuff that's helpful to what I'm doing. So that's why I always say read as much stuff as you can about as many different fields because you don't know what's going to be useful or that's going to kind of help you with a problem,
Definitely.
All right. Well, the giveaway is running now. You can see people are getting knocked out really quickly. And Dave is here. I had a question for Dave, but I've totally lost it. Oh, it was about your preset video. You've got a new video coming out later this afternoon on presets, and for some reason it still won't let me redirect to it afterwards. I'm not sure why. So
is this the preset tab in the editor that it'll changing presets for the inspectors?
Yeah.
Spoilers.
Yeah, I know. Seriously, God.
Sorry, God.
And Batman
I just want to know if I was
dies
going to
at the
learn something new.
You will. It will. Everybody will learn something new, and it might be that I don't know what presets are. No. Yeah, it's the preset. If you go into the preferences and everything, there's the preset tab, and then in there's the preset manager, and it's all about how to set presets for any component. So if you've got audio sources and you want to set those as spatial, and you want to have every audio source that you set from then on be spatial as default, or you want to set filters for that, it goes through that. And then obviously, because I'm a tools programmer, it then tells you how to set that in your tools. So it tells you how to set default presets and all the rest.
Nice. Well, we'll have to stream to that afterwards. It looks like it's actually in a different section. You're just missing the section. I'll send you the link so you can add me, and then we'll stream over to that when we wrap things up.
I added you.
There's another section, a community section. It's not on the featured channels. There's like a community settings section for approved users.
I see a fight brewing.
Time to see YouTube's common sense and why they added two lists.
It's a totally different one. Oh yeah. There's a section for who can live redirect.
Live redirects, and I've got Jason Weimann on there.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
There's even an option to allow it from channels you subscribe to. I don't know why it's not working.
I guess Dave gets a year of JetBrains for defeating you, Jason.
Did he defeat me?
Yeah, he destroyed you. Actually, you should get like 4 years.
Oh, you know what? You probably did it on my other channel is why. Let me give you the correct username. It's probably my other YouTube channel.
That's right. You do actually have the other one.
I have the one that I did for some assets. It just has like asset document videos. So add that one, and then I can probably do it.
You make me cry.
It's based off the URL. That's why. That explains it.
Oh, no, I need the full URL for the Unity, for that particular one.
Okay. I'll pull up my full channel one and drop it in here in a second.
Technical Development 101.
YouTube's awesome. It's yeah.
Oh, I was actually in I don't know if you know the Spiffing Brit channel.
I do. I do.
He had a live stream yesterday where he was actively trying to
relation. No relation.
But you know him, right? You're both from England.
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah.
Everyone's friends, yeah. He actively had a stream trying to break these systems. And so the entire stream, I was part of it, and we're trying to like hit the maximum peaks for various different things and seeing how far we can push their back end stuff, which is pretty fun. So I bring it up to say that he had the same problem. He literally had pre-planned to have a section where he was going to use the streaming back and forth thing, and he couldn't get it working either. So it's not just you.
We'll get it figured out.
It all makes me cry.
There were a bunch of other questions I have starred here, so I was going to just pop a couple of them up. This one is the one that's come up a bunch of times. IOC, dependency injection versus singletons.
What a one to bring up 25 minutes before the end. 30-second rundown, Jason.
Give him the 30-second rundown.
Do you reckon he can do it in 30 seconds?
I think that he's done it enough times that he can probably... Not. No. But maybe try. Maybe come close. Maybe get it under a minute.
You want to get a timer started?
Yeah, hang on. I'm going to get one up.
My first words are neither /don't or /both. I don't know. So it's
like he's already starting.
Don't start. I'm kidding.
Yeah, you're trying to cheat.
Seriously.
Man,
are you starting the timer?
I am. Hang on.
Are you okay?
I'm having so cool.
I mean, this was directed directly at you, Jason. So
okay, you've already started it. Oh, that's not fair. Okay, fine.
Yeah, because you cheated.
First of all, IOC it could be one of two things. There's inversion of control, or you can have the inverting dependency, depending which one you mean. You use IOC inversion of control. Don't use dependency injection. As for singletons work when it's small, don't work when it's big. There's a lot more details, but I don't have much time, so there you go. Best I can do.
I usually start with singletons and then refactor away as needed. As the project gets bigger, or if the project dies, then I don't worry about it at all. Try to keep it simple until I'm at that point where I need the architecture.
So technically, there was another Jason talking after Jason talked. So does that extend the time that they spent talking about it? Because we just said, can
No, that's
Jason
game
do it in 30
mechanics. You cut
seconds?
the animation reset.
No, we only need the relevant one.
Now I feel like I was cheating there. All right, so we've got a couple more questions. What's going on with mastermind groups? I did another one this morning. I'm trying to do 1 or 2 a week right now, just adding people. So just keep an eye out for emails for those. I'll probably pick up the pace on those a lot in the next month after the conference, but it's going slow. It's still going along, but going slow. And then Yorai had a question. You popped. Which one was that? Oh, was that Jason's shortest answer? Yes.
Yeah, I had earlier. I've been seeing throughout the stream multiple people asking about Houdini and VFX and Unity. I just wanted to lightly touch on that because I am actually looking at Houdini myself recently, and it's pretty interesting to think about. Though not going to talk specifically about the tool, more than explaining why it's interesting, if that's okay.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about Houdini real quick.
Does
We
he
actually
also
had a
get
lot of
30
discussions
seconds?
about this at GDC too.
30 seconds shouldn't be enough for what I want to describe, but
Maybe 60.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
I mean, the entire point is to have meaningful talk. So if you want to have your meaningful talks under 60 seconds, where's TikTok? Yeah, so just to lightly touch on it, Houdini. So it's a tool which, unlike most other tools where you directly work with your things, manipulating them in whatever editor space that you think about, destructively, making information move one way and not backwards. Houdini isn't like that. It is about making non-destructive manipulations to information in such a way that you can build your things in whatever way you want, manipulate them in any direction, and if you don't like how you do something, you can cut off back to any point in the construction line of what you're trying to make. It's a bit difficult to explain, so it's more similar to how you construct shaders in shader graph in Unity, or doing visual scripting where you have blocks that manipulate information and you can copy paste them. You can visually see what's going on in every step of the way, and you can cut off things at any point that you dislike and reconstruct. It's unlike Blender in a sense that you have a 3D point, you move it, and then there's no way to go back to the original point anymore, ever, aside manually doing it again. So I think there is a lot of value to discussing about Houdini as a non-destructive tool, because recently I've been having a giant rant about Unity and how it's destructive its animation system is. And I wanted to ask, have you ever, any of you, worked with a destructive system and deciding, like, this is a pain?
I've worked with Unity. It destroys a lot of my projects, whether I want to or not.
Yeah, no. So I just want to touch on that because it's people don't think about this enough. A lot of the systems we use for almost anything are super, super destructive in the way that they manipulate things, and I freaking hate it. There's this move recently that I'm seeing that a lot of people will advocate for non-destructive tools. So, for example, there is Houdini itself. There's also Substance Designer, where you make nodes to construct textures so that whatever changes you want to make, you don't have to keep a history of however you manipulated the texture. You never lose any single step of the way.
Same goes for DaVinci Resolve, by the way. That from a design philosophy for video editing is an awful lot of tweaking things. And from the color correcting perspective, if you're doing color correction in other tools, you have a node-based solution, which means you can really dial in things as opposed to exactly the same destructive things, which will bake it all into one, and you're kind of stuck with that. Similarly with Photoshop, similarly with Illustrator, a lot of these now have the equivalent of smart objects, which allow you to have sort of historical, non-destructive solutions. So that's what we're talking about, basically.
Yeah. Smart objects in Photoshop, as far as I know, don't keep a perfect history for what they're doing.
No, so that's a little bit of a stretch, but specifically node-based non-destructive solutions tends to be the main. Yeah.
So I just wanted to discuss about that, because when people are saying working Houdini with Unity, you're really just going about information conversion from one endpoint to the other. I think there is a Houdini plugin to get whatever you're making in Houdini into Unity, and they have something to let you use all the customizable options in Houdini, letting that happen there and then bring it into Unity. So there was this one person who made like a fancy bridge that he can drag and make it any length, and it would make planks at the exact right spot, etc., etc. So there is a ton of value in Houdini in general. It is a different mindset to work with non-destructive tools, but it is incredibly empowering. I think 2 streams ago we talked about assets that let you do that with terrain in Unity. Gaia, as an example, with the stamps that you can move them around. That's another good example. In general, if you can
Similarly, there's a lot of 2D packs, and same with like 3D tile map things, where you actively like you make a smart block, and the smart block has like the grass layer at the top and the stuff on the sides, and then as you move it around, it will conform to the right different spaces. So there's a lot of these kinds of workflows. I will say, just as a small side note though, to a degree, this is actually what Git is kind of doing. Not quite the same thing. There's a big difference I'll explain in a second. But the idea is that the whole point of something like Git or any other versioning control system is that you should always be able to pick a moment in time and rewind back to that moment in time. But the problem with a source control solution like that is the friction we discussed way back at the start, which is that a source control system should theoretically allow you to take a project and rewind back 3 weeks or whatever you want to where it was. But there is a friction in rewinding a project and going through that whole process. Having a non-destructive workflow means that you don't have to have the cost of literally rewinding the project. You can just dynamically work with it in new ways. So it's all about removing this friction as much as possible.
Yeah. And for the person asking regarding non-destructive version of GIMP, I don't know of one. But in general, GIMP and Photoshop and all of these give you layers, which are essentially non-destructive manipulations, as long as they're additive, which is a mild inconvenience, because you can't say delete the outlines as a step in any of these layers. You can only add things on top of each other. So there are folders, there are masks. All of these are additive changes. You can manipulate how you want to mask things, but you're not destroying everything beneath.
If you want another example, sorry.
I just want to say Andrew's own assets that let you customize all of the stuff in the project there, between the blend shape, the colors, and making the icons. Did you already release that? No?
No, that's still being worked on. We should talk
Yeah.
shaders at some point.
Yeah, sure. So even just icon creation, if you get different options of backgrounds and different options of everything, as long as you can say, I don't have only one final version and everything is constructed in steps that I can customize, this is an incredibly empowering workflow.
I was just going to say, one thing that I miss about Unreal more than anything else was back in the UDK days, if you were building like geometry the same way you do with Pro Builder now. I mean, I like Pro Builder. It's got a lot of really great tools, but you're destructively creating stuff. And the big difference is back in my day in UDK, you used what was called the BSP brushes. And they were basically math operators. So you draw a box and it would either be additive or subtractive. And you would build a block and you'd put a smaller block inside of it and it would subtract that shape. And so you could build your shapes out of these additive and subtractive shapes. And it's exactly that. If you decided you'd cut a hole in the wrong place or made the window wrong, you could just nudge the box down. So nice. You could do so much iteration in so much faster time. Unfortunately, it was extremely slow when running. And the difference is, in Unity, you can leave the Pro Builder stuff in there. You maybe just cull the back faces. In UDK and Unreal, you kind of wanted to get rid of 90% of your PSP brushes by the time the project was done. So there's trade-offs.
Yeah, also I think they removed BSP from UE5.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
Yeah. But the point remains, non-destructive workflows are incredibly powerful, and also in Unreal they actually have that for quite a lot, because blueprints are kind of everywhere in the engine now. So you can do that with animations, you can do that with a lot. I'm trying to think of something you can't do it with in Unreal right now, and I can't. It's probably somewhere out there. I'm just not familiar enough to point at one of these and say, "Ha! I found a spot that there is no support for doing things additively." So yeah, if you can use Houdini and you know how to, and you want to use it with Unity, by all means, it's just a matter of data conversion from Houdini to Unity. I see no reason not to.
Just make sure your team is good with it. I've seen a lot of people try to switch, and then most of their team doesn't actually like the switch, and then they switch back because they're
but if,
like one person knows how to use Houdini well, and nobody else on the team can manage it at all.
Fair.
It reminds me, I was working on a project where there was someone was ripping Zelda models into what were they using at the time? It was like a 3D modeling tool. I forgot which one it was. And then when Unity has support natively for the like various different modeling files, and so you can have it like live connecting. And then when I got the project, I didn't have 3D tools installed because I can't do 3D stuff. And so I remember I had so much frustration that I was getting issues that I couldn't solve because I didn't have that linking stuff. Infuriating.
So Michael Murray asks, why Houdini when Blender is normally good enough? I just wanted to bring it up that they're doing different things. And Blender actually recently got way closer to Houdini with the geometry nodes that they've added. Now, Houdini is about building things procedurally out of rules, nodes that say when thing exists, do thing with it. You're building logical steps to getting from a starting point to an ending point. So Blender isn't like that. It has modifiers. It has a lot of tools that let it seem like that. But at its core, you don't get power tools for making things procedurally in a way that you can reuse per object nicely. Like, for example, if you just want to have two objects with the exact same set of modifiers in Blender, you actually have to go and do the exact same set of modifiers manually. If they have two different rigs, you have to do that for both rigs manually. If they have whatever have you, usually it's going to end up with me saying you have to do them separately. Houdini isn't like that. You make a workflow and you pipe things into that workflow. So, for example, if you want to correct 150 different animations for one rig to another, Houdini lets you make a process that says, take the character, figure out the bones, connect them to my character, move my character to match those bones, also add one correction to the shoulder because my shoulder is unique and awesome, and then export that into a file with a new name based on the original file name, but replacing that character's name with my character name. And then you can press export and it will do it one time. But unlike Blender, where you have to do the entire process again for a second one, you can just say, yeah, take also all of these other ones. So that's the power of it.
Yeah, and it's just worth noting that this philosophy obviously isn't super new. It's just it's new now in UI based tools. In general, this is the same thing that functional programming does, and even that was stolen from mathematics because if you think about it from a mathematical perspective, there's something called a function. And a function, this is long before functions in JavaScript or whatever, is where you input certain values and it gives you a certain output. You might remember back when you're in school, you might be learning like x multiplied by 2 might be a function, and so any value for x will be multiplied by 2 and gets a set output. And the idea is, in say a functional programming language, is you can stack these operators together. If I stack a plus and a multiply and then whatever, then any number I pass in will fundamentally do the same thing. And if I want to change that operation, I can swap the values in these little black boxes and then pipe different values through it. And there's a lot of power to doing that. There is costs insofar as that you're often copying data. It's not like, because you literally, if the whole point of destructive workflows is you bake the results down, which makes it smaller, more efficient, and various different issues. But if you keep it non-destructive, you have to retain a lot more information, which, as a whole separate side note, is specifically why Git is so clever, because it manages to give you versioning across a whole pipeline of versions without storing duplicate copies of every version. It stores the hashed differences between them, and then it retains that connection without bloating the file size. It's very interesting to look into that stuff, but suffice to say, if you're interested in this kind of system, there's an entire arm of programming. We work in predominantly this concept of object-oriented programming, and that's as it sounds. It's very much when you talk about a thing and another thing, and one thing uses another thing. But there's another more mathematically driven side of programming, where you treat things like these individual functions. And the power of that is it's stateless. Nothing is allowed to change some global immutable style states. What you end up with is a world where every time, if you give this thing this value, you get this result. And from a testing perspective and a scalability perspective, that can be extremely powerful because you can move blocks around, you can rely on blocks, and there's not going to be some internal flag that changes and does something weird. But if you want a classic example of this as it applies to what you're properly coding, there's the whole concept of link. And so link lets you do things like order by and group and filters and whatever. And if you've used the link statements in C#, you might notice that they return you an object that's a copy of your list, which is very frustrating because you're like, I just wanted to change the values. But the reason it does that is precisely for this, is that if I have a list and I want the same list, but I want all of the names to add +1 to the end of it, I might risk causing issues. So I duplicate the list and I do some, modifier on it and I get back a changed version. And if I keep doing that, I can reliably retain this sort of non-destructive workflow. So something to think about is the relationship between non-destructive workflows, functional programming. F# is another entire language based on functional programming, if you like the C# style. And then moving on, there's other solutions that get further into math and how that works.
I want to congratulate our winner real quick since they won in the middle of this. Congrats to the Lizard Wizard. Just shoot me an email, jason@game.courses. I'll send you over the writer code. It's a 1-year free writer license and a pro pass for GameDev Guild, which is coming up in about a week and a half. And this is a quick preview of kind of what the mixers look like, which were a lot of fun. I don't know about you guys last week, but I had a blast at the mixer events, just hanging out, talking to a bunch of people, and or really just meeting a bunch of people that I'd seen in here and other places that I hadn't talked to yet in live chat, and just seeing some of the conversations. It was interesting, all the different conversations that were popping up.
Yeah, I can legitimately say I had a lot more fun than I thought I would. To be brutally honest, I don't usually like those kinds of meetups. I'm kind of worried it wasn't going to be that fun. But I was just bopping around, joining in conversations. We ended up talking about everything from test-driven development up to just talking about different people's games and things. And it was genuinely very fun. So
yeah, it was really good. Really good.
I really liked just being able to kind of jump into the conversations that were interesting. And when people started going on stuff and they were into it, I could always just walk right over and hop into the next one. And it was a lot of fun. So yeah, if you're interested in that, there's a link down below in the description. You can check it out. It's coming up next week. And then, like I said, next month, we'll do some free meetups and stuff for everybody. Once we've got the conference over with, we'll do some more open public stuff so that everybody can hop in and do some talks and stuff. I think that'll be a lot of fun and just entertaining. But on the win, just shoot me an email and I will send it over to you. Oh, somebody wanted to know if Salim is coming. Salim, are you coming to the conference? I mean, I was trying to get Salim to do a talk, but it didn't happen. So.
Nobody wants to hear me talk. I answer my questions in 10 seconds or less. So.
I figured maybe worst case I can get him to jump in on a round table if he's not busy.
I was going to go last week, but for those that don't know, I'm starting a new job on Monday. So I had like a week off this week in between leaving my old job. And it's like literally the first like week vacation I've had where I wasn't like worried about work or something in like 5 years. So I took the time to deal with some personal stuff. My daughter's about to graduate and start college and all kinds of stuff, and just kind of take a break and play games and like be a game player versus a game player / developer for a week. So yeah.
What about next Sunday? You think you'll be able to drop by?
Sunday here?
Yeah. Oh, well, after I think we're gonna do it at noon Sunday, right?
Oh, yeah. So yeah, you can probably book me for that. Just keep reminding me. My first week of work should go pretty chill, so I don't think there was gonna be any stress over the weekend. But yeah, I'm eager. Besides, I do want to get some game ideas for outside is the bad stuff. I'm curious what people come up with. But yeah, I'm trying to get more involved for sure. So yeah.
Sweet.
Let's book it. Cool. You guys all heard me say it, so I guess I have to do it now.
Now you've already committed to it. That's one of the things I like to do. Just say that I'm going to do stuff, so that way I feel obligated to do it. If I say it out loud and I tell people, like I tell you guys, I'm going to be here on Sunday every Sunday, then I feel like I have to show up Sunday. It's not like
so you've never missed a Sunday ever.
Oh,
you've never missed a Sunday.
I kind of missed one, but I was out of state. I still hopped in for a minute, but yeah, I feel bad. Like I feel like
Excuses.
they do something, like you got to do it. Force yourself some of that responsibility. So I guess we'll start wrapping things up. If anybody's got anything they wanted to share, I know Andrew had some assets that I've got linked down below for the Monster Bundle. That's a brand new bundle, and a couple that are on sale for 75% off with just a couple left. I think there were like less than 20 left on one of them.
Yep.
And luckily, we did not make it to 300 likes before the end of the stream, so my beard can survive. I was getting a little bit concerned.
Oh, wait, what?
Everybody was going to spam the like. Oh yeah, earlier on, I said if we got to 300 by the end of the stream, I would shave my beard.
At least choose a number that you know you might get close to. You just didn't want to take the beard off. Come on now.
No, I went with my normal. Go shoot for the stars, and then if it makes it there, then okay, fine, I'll deal with it. Otherwise, it's okay.
If you get rid of your beard, I'll get rid of my beard.
Ooh,
I'll take the stakes, but we only have 3 minutes left.
Come on, let's go.
I am not getting rid of my beard.
You don't even have a beard. You barely have anything there.
It's grey. It's really grey, so it's mostly see-through. I look so young.
You look like you just fell into a bunch of paintbrushes and you just kind of
Actually,
got
this is nicely trimmed today. I trimmed it up.
You call that the VR beard because you have to keep it lean for all of the moving the headsets up and back.
Oh yeah.
That's one of the reasons I used to have a shaved head, because like wearing VR headsets all the time, you come off.
I unironically did the same thing. Yeah,
everywhere.
What's VR? Tell me more.
If people want me to shave Jason's beard the next time he comes around, make sure to invite everybody to the stream so you get 300.
Oh yes, please.
So this is an ongoing thing. The minute we get 300 likes in one stream.
Yes.
Additionally, they add up every time.
Yes. I like it. Let's do it. Cumulative 300 likes. And you got to live stream that.
Yeah. Well,
and you have to, at the same time,
start here.
While.
Oh yeah, that's not happening.
But while you're shaving him, he has to answer questions about singletons.
In 30 seconds or less.
30 seconds.
Getting terrified now. All right. Anybody got any last second stuff they want to share before we head out? Things to check out, go do or see?
I put the video there.
Yep.
But
all right. That's the one. Dave's video.
If you want the teaser for our next fight, we should probably have. Jason Story and I have some very differing opinions about serialized field backing fields.
Oh yeah, that was a fun one. Yeah, we actually had a genuine back and forth rant about a particular topic, which is nice.
Oh,
yeah,
we should definitely have that as a big discussion. All right, well, I guess I'll just say, everybody, please hit the thumbs up button, subscribe, share, drop a comment down below. Let us know what stuff we should cover next time, or just say hi, and check out all the links down below, and we'll see you next week. All right, thanks again, everybody. What's lame?
You could have bought 100 likes for $10. I'd totally invest some money to get that beard off.
All right.